join, but I
Yes.
think we'll begin like in a minute. We have
That would be perfect. So we are live now, so we can start any minute, Nishat ma'am says.
Please start. You don't need to ask me.
Okay. So you can go ahead, Juby.
okay. Welcome everyone to the post-lunch session of our conference. So the our two-day international conference on confronting the global, exploring the local digital apprehensions of poetics and Indian literature. So for the post-lunch session, we have Dr. Souvik Mukherjee as our chair. I'll introduce him first. Dr. Souvik Mukherjee is Assistant Professor in Cultural Studies at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta, India. Souvik's research looks at the narrative and the literary through the emerging discourse of video games as storytelling media and at how these games inform and challenge our conceptions of narratives, identity, and culture. Related interests and expertise include a broad spectrum of topics in game studies, ranging from identity and temporality in video games to the video game industry in Southeast Asia. Currently, he's researching how video games relate to post colonial studies and separately also how certain ancient Indian board games contribute to the understanding of gameplay. Shavik is the author of two monographs, Video Games and Storytelling, Reading Games and Playing Books, which was published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2015, and Video Games and Post-Colonialism, Empire Plays Back, published by Springer UK in 2017. He is also the co-editor of the special issue Post-Colonial Perspectives in Video Games. He has been named a Digital Games Research Association Distinguished Scholar in 2019. His other interests are the digital humanities, post-structuralist theory, post-humanism, and early modern literature. His database is on the Dutch cemetery in Chinsura, the Scottish cemetery in Kolkata, and the 19th century Bengali industrialist Matilal Seal are all available open access. He has also been an advisor on an archive on the Plaques of Presidency project. He has been a board member of the Digital Games Research Association and a founder member of Dharti, the digital humanities group in India. He is also an affiliated senior research fellow at the Center of Excellence Game Studies at the University of Tampere. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you so much. That was a very generous introduction, and I am so fortunate today to be back at JMU again, and for this fantastic conference. Today's panel. This is the second panel, I believe, of the conference. Is actually a really kind of rich panel. Again, with papers on graphic novels, women's poetry, internet and the women's poetry, and of course, again, two fantastic papers on video games and in the Indian context that I'm looking forward to so much. So today we have four speakers in this panel, and I've just had a chat with the organizers. So if you have questions, please put the questions in the chat box. We will take the questions immediately after each paper. So we will start with our first speaker, and who is Professor Nishat Haider from Jamia Millia Islamia University, and she will be speaking on narrative and play, some reflections on video games based on Bollywood. Professor Haider is she's professor of English at JMU. She is the author of Tyranny of Silences, Contemporary Indian Poetry. She has served as director of in the Institute of Women's Studies, University of Lucknow. She's the recipient of many academic awards, including the Meenakshi Mukherjee Prize in 2016, the C.D. Narasimhaya Award in 2010, and the Isaac Sequeira Memorial Award in 2011. She has presented papers at numerous academic conferences, and her essays have been included in a variety of scholarly journals and books. She has conducted numerous conferences, seminars, workshops on gender budgeting and gender sensitization. She has worked on various projects funded by the Ministry of Women and Child Development, UNICEF, UGC, and other agencies. She has lectured extensively on subjects at the intersection of cinema, culture, and gender studies. Her current research interests include post-colonial studies, translation, popular culture, and gender studies. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Professor Haider again to the conference. And over to you, ma'am, if you would. We look forward to hearing you on narrative and play, some reflections on video games based on Bollywood.
Thank you, Professor Souvik Mukherjee. I'm a huge fan of your writings. Without much further ado, now this paper was inspired by my son's avid love for video games, and he's a very active gamer. So, for grounding the crucial role of games in digital cultural studies and digital humanities, my paper today delineates the aesthetic connections between Bollywood films and video games in order to critically engage with the issues of interactivity in consumer culture, narrative, and spectatorship. India is the emerging digital cinema laboratory of the world. Although a 2007 study by the market researcher iCube revealed that only 5% of India's 42 million internet users are active gamers, the report of Ernst & Young reveals that India is seen as a major player in the video game industry with an estimate growth at a CJR, that is the compound annual growth rate of 55% and above today. One of the most significant recent developments in the Indian film industry is the collaboration between Hollywood DreamWorks and Bollywood Reliance Big Entertainment owned by Anil Ambani that has resulted in the cross-flow in crafts, music, art, and games, which have been far more pervasive than in movies. Now, the video games and the Bollywood have a synergistic relationship with licensing tie-ins in which video games are designed based on mainstream movies, a huge variety including films like Krish series, Gajani, Rav, etc. Yet the video games remain understudied, and applications of critical theory to the study of digital gaming is still in preliminary stages. Delineating the aesthetic connection between Bollywood films and video games, this paper critically engages with the interactivity in consumer culture, the issues related to film aesthetics, spectatorship, and narrative to understand the place of economic, political, legal, social, and cultural institutions in mediating and partly shaping technological change. This paper will also extrapolate the process of transformation when a story moves from a film text to a gaming text, since video games can be adequately explained neither by narratological nor by ludological approach. This paper argues that a hermeneutics of digital science that can be put to use by humanists and technologists alike requires a diversity of approaches to the computer game. While a survey of all the theoretical positions that scholars have brought to the understanding of the text of games or gaming is beyond the scope of this paper presentation today, I would try to review some of the approaches from aesthetic criticism to critical cultural theory, which offer important analytical tools to engage with the complex interactive worlds of gaming that inform my discussion of video games on Bollywood movies. Although Hertz, Poole, and Wolf refer to games on arcade machines, consoles, and PCs as video games, Conford et al. Prefer to distinguish between computer and video games, and Haddon uses the broad term interactive games. This paper, despite the definitional differences, uses the terms like video games or computer games or digital games interchangeably to refer to the entire field and to embrace arcade, computer, console, and mobile games in all their diversity. The paper presentation today is divided into two parts. The first part of the paper will frame the key concepts, approaches, and disciplinary tools of game studies, the evaluation of games as designed artifacts, and emergent culture, the game design process, narrative and roles in game and gameplay, the ideological implications of the medium as a whole, and the relationship between the players and designers and the actual industry practices. From this conceptual core, in the second part of my paper presentation, I will try to lay out an understanding of the digital games of Bollywood movies and gaming within wider social, cultural, and global forces. In this paper, the video games of Bollywood movies will be examined through the lens of Ian Begos's notion of procedural rhetoric, a practice or technique of using processes persuasively for making arguments with computational systems, and for unpacking computational arguments others have created to elucidate the intricate conventions of the game industry and the ways in which players are woven to its fabric. I will examine the movie simulations and games of a few mainstream Bollywood movies for outlining some of the current industry practices and for considering the issues and or tensions attached with them. Hence, I've intentionally avoided statistical data, charts, and figures unless extremely crucial and verifiable. Now I come to the first part of my paper presentation, which I've titled as Understanding Games, Theories, and Approaches. Now, games are a mangle of social and material world production and consumption of human intentions and design experiences, material constraints and affordances, and evolving sociocultural practices. The video games have been defined variously by Joanne Huizinga in Homo Ludens, Roger Kailos in Man Playing Games, Elliot Avedon and Brian Sutton Smith in The Study of Games, and Gonzalo Frasca in recent work. There are a few overlapping elements in all these approaches that have been taken in delineating the video game are an algorithm, player activity, interface, and graphics. As Alexander R. Galloway puts it, if photographs are images and films are moving images, then video games are action. Without the active participation of players and machines, video games exist only as static computer code. Video games come into being when the machine is powered up and the software is executed. They exist when enacted. Since these actions or enactments are undertaken across multiple actors, creators, developers, gamers, this makes computer games extremely challenging to study because it is difficult to identify and recreate recollections of how they were inspired and of the myriad collective and negotiated decisions that gave them the final form, as well as explanations of how and in what context they were eventually to be experienced. Inspired by Henry Jenkins, I wish to engage with this issue of media convergence as a process instead of a static termination. That is the flow of content across multiple media platforms, the cooperation between multiple media industries, and the search for new structure of media financing that falls at the interstices between the old and the new media. Hence, at the convergence of technology, cinema, and new media, there is intense experimentation with and research of video games which apply apply to film narrative, cinematic strategies, and aesthetics to the creation of interactive environments. So in the video games, the three-dimensional landscape, I'm skipping a part of my paper, it's getting lengthy. In the video game, the three-dimensional landscape virtual reality is an interactive, immersive experience generated by a computer. The point of departure in an analysis of game is a closer look at interactivity as the link that connects a media presentation with the experience of usage, thus constituting it as the minimal requirement for bidirectionality of immersion. The quality of attention with these kinds of interactive processes produce is often described as immersive. The immersive nature of computer games and the invisibility or transparency of the medium that Moulthrop suggests this produces works both to empower the user and to simultaneously serve the interests of the oligopolitics that produce them. The text, if you are to use that term at all for computer game, becomes a complex interaction between the player and the game, or what is described as gameplay. The immersion of the computer game player is less the submersion in virtual reality as the quality of intense concentration produced by having to attend to the combination of activities, understanding control systems, guessing out the gameplay, puzzle cracking, enemy killing, and strategic planning. Additionally, Ernie and Meira mentioned that players do not just involve themselves in ready-made gameplay, but also keenly engage in the construction of these experiences. They bring their desires, anticipations, and previous experiences with them and interpret and reflect the experience in that light. Computer games appeal to people because they are configurative, offering the chance to manipulate complex systems within continuous loops of intervention, observation, and response, which enables an avowal of players' agency and indicates the difference between gameplay and other types of cultural consumption. Games simultaneously function as both culture and cultural object, as microcosms for studying the emergence, maintenance, and transformation of both designed object and emergent culture, caught up in broader conversations with politics, contemporary life, and academics. Some of the outstanding research in different aspects of the game studies have been done by, for example, Dan Carr and Helen Kennedy on preferences and pleasure, Jennifer Jensen and Suzanne D. Castle on critical play and alternative game design by Lisa Nakamura, on race and ethnicity by Nick Taylor and Taylor, Jensen, and D. Castle on gender and gaming cultures, and T.I. Taylor on gender and embodiment in online games. Now, if we map the terrain of the emerging field of video game theory, the different trends in research and theorizing, we'll find that it is a site of convergence of an expansive diversity of approaches which encompass film and television theory, semiotics, performance theory, game studies, literary theory, computer science theories of hypertext, cybertext, interactivity, identity, postmodernism, ludology, media theory, narratology, aesthetics and art theory, psychology, theories of simulacra, among others. Now, the next section of my paper presentation delineates some of these disciplinary paradigms or frameworks to map out the changes in Bollywood digital culture and Bollywood-based video games from two positions of technologically and socially determined view of game production and representation. Bollywood games are analyzed from an industrial institutional perspective that considers the extent to which their qualities are shaped by their business strategies. To analyze Bollywood video games, two interrelated concerns, those of gaming and culture, and the textual or narrative universe of games. That is, paratext to the games, game review, etc., and reference text will be also addressed. I will try to, if time permits, in this part of my presentation. Now, Bollywood accounts for nearly 15%. I'm not going again into the statistics. I'm leaving out all that. Now, Bollywood... Now, one of the most attractive, now gaming is an inextricable part of the contemporary post-colonial sensibility that is defined by a strong reliance on post-reflexivity and centered on performativity. Feature films and video game industries are so intimately linked to the traditional electronic media that film entertainment in India is a key driver for content on television, video games, music, animation, and advertising. Bollywood incorporated gaming with the release of several film-themed titles such as Gajni, Raman, Genesis, Agnipath, Singham, and Dawn 2 across multiple platforms. Though localized gaming content face stiff competition from international content, which often tend to have better quality, but given the success of games such as Ravan, Genesis have seen in the past, the Indian gamer appears to be open to the content that is on par with international standards. The numerous new social gaming platforms which incorporate micropayments, games to wins, Apogino and Nazara technologies, and GCity have been designed to cater to the Indian context. The Indian gaming industry can be divided into three separate segments: mobile game, console gaming, and PC and online gaming. Though the Indian gaming industry is still at an embryonic stage, and in terms of a global presence lags far behind the US, China, Canada, Australia, and Japan, yet the Indian animation, gaming, and VFX industry saw more than 30% growth in 2007 over 2016, according to the FICCI PwC 2012 report. Today, more and more movies are marked with an official game, usually on mobile phones. With the growing reach of mobile phones penetrating even the rural areas, the mobile service providers are flooding the market with new movie-based applications, games, videos, and new alerts. With this backdrop in mind, it is no surprise that movies that release these days come with their own mobile and web games. According to the FICCI KPMG report 2012, the Indian gaming sector achieved revenues of INR 13 billion in line with the previous year forecasts. Although the wireless gaming market, 14%, draws its strength from the Asia-Pacific region, particularly Japan and South Korea, the analysts say that going by the explosive growth in the mobile phone users base in India, generating gaming content may become the next big thing to happen in the country after IT outsourcing. India is the fastest growing cellular market and has the second largest consumer base after China. From running pre-release publicity teasers as text messages to selling ringtones and other forms of film music, Bollywood is fast discovering the magic of mobile telephony. The games resembling popular Bollywood movies are getting popular in mobile app stores. The blockbuster movies like Krish 3, Dhoom 3, Chennai Express, and Race 2 and Race 3, they have smartphone games with the names and characters. Among the most popular India-made games are Bhagat Singh by Mitashi Entertainment Private Limited, as well as mobile game based on Dhoom 2 and Orampo, an auto racing game based on a Tamil film of the same name. Hangama and Game Shastra have developed state-of-the-art games around the iconic 1975 Bollywood film Sholay and Rajinikanth's Tamil movie Kochai Dayanin. I must be excused if I'm not pronounced it properly. And they have been released in Tamil and 5 additional languages, including Hindi, Telugu, Bengali, Marathi, and Punjabi. Now, Krish 3 game had over almost more than 2 million downloads globally at Android and Apple app stores. These games are free, but still generating revenues through the freemium model, where the game is free, but in-app purchases are charged. The filmmakers license the titles and characters to game developers on a revenue sharing basis. Indeed, there are not only Indian companies vying to acquire the franchisee rights of Bollywood stars like Amitabh Bachchan and Shah Rukh Khan for their mobile games, but also Chinese giants who have been trying to enter this field, and they have with plans to release a dozen new gaming features featuring only Hindi film actors. In terms of capital, star quality, and technology, Bollywood cinema is competing in the international market today. Through the engagement with an immersive computer-generated visual syntax and multi-level digital narrative in Bollywood video games, the next section of my paper presentation maps out how diverse yet interconnected issues coalesce to imply the likelihood of new modes of spectatorial identification that may be possible as the cinema and video games become increasingly cross-fertilized and hybridized. My discussion will function in all the 3 registers: theoretical, literary, and cinematic, leveraging a comparative procedural criticism to motivate an analysis of the following 2 video games, Krish 3, the game, and Dhoom 3, Jet Speed. If at any point I seem to dwell on only one of these registers, it is purely for a strategic purpose. Now, Krish 3, the game.
You have to wind up. We have like 7 minutes more.
Okay.
For questions.
Krish 3, the game, 7 minutes is too long for me. I'll wrap up within that.
For only questions
game based on the movie superhero science fiction film Krish. It's a free, fast-paced, multiplayer runner game made for the fans of superhero and action adventure games. The game is based on the character of Krish, who intends to provide the players with the chance to relive the superhero's life, perform path-breaking stunts, and use state-of-the-art gadgets and weapons to take down the enemy. It is based on a particular gamer subculture which is focused on the practice of speed runs, that is, high-speed rushing through a single level of the game, in accordance with both representational and gameplay focus. Though the player's attention is typically centered more on the main character, but the players have an option to choose between 4 characters to play with: Krish, Kaya, who is a shape-shifting female mutant; Carl, who's a handicapped evil genius who possesses telekinetic powers; and Frogman. The gameplay of Krish 3 presents the player with a clear and simple challenge of surviving while shooting everything that moves. The level design of Krish 3, which shows the first-person view into a realistically modeled and textured 3D environment, is a vital constituent of immersion that is not only useful in
Welcome,
introducing
Heather.
the multidimensional nature of immersion experiences, but also central to our understanding gameplay experiences. When playing this game, the player gets a strong sense of being there himself or herself. The quality of the identification and immersion in Krish 3 is distinct, as it is not only the player who's jumping, climbing, and seldom falling, but the player is also guiding Krish, the player character, to do the combat and the acrobatics. This duality, game player's role within the game as both a subject and an object, has an effect on the gameplay experience, and that furthermore to manipulative action, there is play of identification involved. The powerful quality of the interactive moving images and sound provide the overpowering embodied kinesthesia and strong sensory immersion for the player. Throughout the game, the players are always trying to outrun and trap each other using gadgets and the relevant skills. On the swipe of a finger, the player enacts the superhero's life, performs awe-inspiring stunts, scale, jump, and slide from building to building for an aerial thrill. You state-of-the-art gadgets and sophisticated weapons, outrun the components, and defeat the enemies. The game has the chance to select his weapon from a wide selection of gadgets and upgrades, customizing to his or her style, attacks, and skills. When the Krish 3 gameplay
Professor Haider, we have 5 more minutes. We have 5 more minutes,
Yeah.
and that includes the question. So if you could just wrap up now, and then we can
the
just leave some time.
heart-stopping action is totally, in totality, provides abundant player immersion and gaming bliss, which is one of the central concepts for analyzing gaming experience. What I would like to say at the end is, since I have to wind up, although game studies is a nascent field in which there are many unknowns, but as we gaze into the future, given the rapid strides made by Bollywood cinema in the last decade, it is not possible to imagine the future possibilities or trajectories other than this is just a beginning. And Shah Rukh Khan's line from the movie Om Shanti Om, picture abhi baki hai mere dost. The film is yet to continue, my friend. It serves as an apt coda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Haider, and what a way to end the discussion here. But it's not really ended, because I'm sure we have more questions. If anyone has questions, we have very little time for the questions, but please do type them into the chat box. And okay, so Jubi has asked a question, which is, Professor Haider, if you could elaborate on gender and gaming culture related to women gamers, and maybe their depiction in Bollywood.
Bollywood itself has a very regressive attitude to women and their portrayal and their imaging and imagining, And as with all visual cultures and popular cultures, gaming too is beset with its own set of problems, because, the gaze, the expected gaze is always the male voyeuristic gaze. So there's much we need, since it is almost at a very nascent stage of development, gaming and gaming culture and gaming experience, we are yet to develop that kind of consciousness which can actually construct a gender-sensitive environment which sees it through this lens. Yes, Jubi.
So, well, some kind of advice for would-be game developers here. Please kind of think of gender sensitivity. Of course, there are now games like Raji which have come out. Okay, there's one more question. That is, video games rely on players much more than any other mode, and active participation becomes imperative for the game to come to life. Can this be looked on as a hindrance? As the proliferation is impossible without the players. So is the kind of active participation to be looked on as a hindrance?
I would, more than a hindrance, I would see as the gameplay of ethical choices also and preferences. Because the kind of role playing that it entails, whom are you killing, what are you doing, because it has its own moral cosmic universe. So I don't see it as a hindrance. I see it as an opportunity to develop new kind of consciousness and sensitivity.
Oh, so there's another one from, I think this is from Sarah, but it's she says that I'm interested in the haptics of game and how touch supplements visuality. I'm wondering if this intersects and how interestingly in these Bollywood-inspired games. So if you could have touch and kind of visuality and how they would relate to this Bollywood-inspired games.
I don't know whether Sarah, if I'm getting the name of the questioner correctly, but whosoever it is, it's a wonderful question, and I think you must have. If you haven't, then please do read Laura Mark's book, The Skin of the Film, which talks about the parda or the film, the literal and metaphorical understanding of the word film as something, the skin that touches you. So those sensory experiences, the kinesthetical and the hapticity that you form with the film, that intersubjective emotion or connectivity, that is very, very important. And part of the immersive quality of the gaming experience has to do with that hapticity too, and the interactivity of the game format. I hope I've answered.
Yeah. So there's one last question. We'll take one last question because we're running out of time. How important do you think game archiving is? Well, game archiving is.
Any kind of archiving is very, very important because it gives you a sense of the development, the transformation, the metamorphosis, and how one progresses or the entire trajectory. So game archiving, as with other archiving, is a must, is imperative.
So, okay, we said one last question, but one last question. So this is last question dash, which is, do games based on, this is from Professor Zaidi, do games based on Bollywood games replicate the ideology of Hindi cinema or deviate it in any way?
Oh, they do deviate it also, because you have the participant or the player's interaction with the game interface also. He can develop his or her own story, kill the right guys instead of the wrong guys. So again, here I have to, the kind of ethical choices that one takes. And also, this is going to, as Professor Zaidi says, this kind of interactivity or this kind of a dialogic conversation between the film and the gamers and the gaming culture and this entire industry is going to bring out many more very interesting, opportunities and things to look forward to.
Well, thank you so much once again, Professor Haider, and thank you all who asked questions, such fascinating questions. I have many questions myself, but some other point perhaps. So we will move on. I know that we are kind of having to kind of we are fighting with time really. So we will move on and move to the next presentation.
Thank you.
And then thank you very much again. The next presentation is by Shruti Sareen, and it is on the internet in the context of Indian women's poetry in English. So just to briefly introduce Shruti, has Shruti logged on yet?
Yes, sir,
okay.
I'm here.
Oh, thanks. So just to briefly introduce Shruti Sareen. Shruti Sareen studied in Rajghat Besant School K5 Varanasi and went on to do English literature from Indraprastha College for Women, University of Delhi. With a keen interest in Indian poetry in English, her MPhil looks at the depiction of urban spaces and her PhD on 21st century feminist poetry. She also teaches whenever she manages to find the job. She has presented about 10 papers in major institutes like DU, JNU, JMI, SAU, AUD, IIAS, Shimla, IAWS, Indian Association of Women's Studies, that is. She has had over 100 poems accepted by Indian and South Asian journals and a handful of short stories. Fantastic, Shruti. And she's currently seeking publishers for a novel and her debut poetry collection. She's passionate about poetry, music, teaching, Assamese culture, queer love and sexuality, mental health, nature and environment. She blogs at www.shrutandheartstrings@blogspot.com. And for those who are interested, I'm going to type the blog address in the chat box. So over to Shruti, and we look forward to your paper and also wish you all the very best for your upcoming books. Okay.
Thank you.
So,
okay, so the title of the paper is The Internet in the Context of Indian Women's Poetry in English. I'll introduce it and then I think I'll skip over the slightly more theoretical bits because in the paper it is better to be more colloquial. The primary focus of this paper is how the internet and our digital electronic devices are connecting us at so many levels and creating a process of becoming flux and hybridity in the process, thereby deconstructing several binary oppositions around us. Our internet connections, which literally provide us connectivity in the age of social media, are connecting us through forming gift economies and discourse communities among us. Hypertext and hypermedia with their hyperlinks connect text to text and to audiovisual elements just as the internet connects people to people. In this process, several binaries are broken down. Most importantly, the binaries between reader and writer, between text and visual, written and oral. I examine how hypertext and hypermedia are changing the production and consumption of poetry. And humans are in flux in the process of becoming just as a text. For example, a poem put on social media may be subject to collaborative authorship and might undergo several revisions and edits as a result of feedback by other people. Thus, both the human and the texts are in flux and binary oppositions are being broken down. The paper looks at these concepts in the context of Indian women's poetry in English. The paper is divided into 3 parts. First, I discuss how the internet is forming gift economies and discourse communities. Then I discuss hypertext and hypermedia. And finally, I examine the concept of cyborgs. So a gift economy is, more of a socialist kind of an economy. This cycle of exchange is where gifts in theory may seem voluntary and selfless, but they in fact form a cycle of mutual obligation. The gifts could be material in terms of economic capital, or symbolic in terms of social or cultural capital, recognition and so on, or services rendered such as holding office, attending funerals, etc. At the same time, people do not help another only looking for personal gain, but out of goodwill, as the other person may never really help them directly. It is a community of gift giving where people know that someone will help them in their hour of need, just as they help others. This can easily be seen in poor people's communities in India today, where people help each other out, take credit, give loans, and so on the basis of need, knowing that their neighbors and community will similarly help them out if they need it someday. The concepts of charity, donations, and pensions are also associated with the idea of a gift economy, where you do good without immediately expecting good in return. In this paper, I attempt to see whether the world of poetry communities can be seen as replicating something like a gift economy. The world of poetry, unlike that of fiction, does not operate by books becoming financially viable and becoming bestsellers. Poets, as well as poetry publishers and journals, hardly make any money. It is the small, tiny poetry presses that have been responsible for keeping poetry alive, as the bigger names in the publishing industry only publish the big names out there, which they can make profits out of, if at all. The internet has been a boon in this regard and has helped in the proliferation of poetry. The short length of the genre is also suitable for poetry. The growth of a wide range of open access poetry journals on the internet also shows that this is a labor of love. These journals are managed mostly without any monetary rewards or gains. Contributors are usually not paid. Readers do not have to pay to access poetry either. There are poets who believe that, poetry is also a work just like anything else and should be remunerated. Print journals, of course, require payment. Poetry journals and presses are usually not based on any profit-making motive, but out of sheer love for the art form. It seems to function like a gift economy in that poets offer their poems for free and mostly get recognition from readers in turn. Readers get to read poetry for free at a small cost and in turn offer symbolic tribute and appreciation. Poetry journals and publishers do subsist to survive at minimal costs. However, this community of the gift economy is no longer a polarized community where readers are separate from writers. The community of the gift economy thus brings me to the next point about a discourse community. A discourse community is a community with a common knowledge base and repertoire, in this case of poetry. Distinctions between writers and readers have been destroyed in the age of the internet, where everyone can turn a poet on social media, in an age where spoken word poetry rages at street corners. Here is an age where everybody can read and everybody can write, and hierarchical divisions have to some extent been broken. Poetry is a niche art, and thus its discourse is limited to within the community. So people outside the discourse community do not really connect with the art form. And it is these poetry journals, anthologies, reviews, awards, spoken word poetry, and importantly, social media, which is helping in creating a discourse community. I move on to the second section of my paper, where I discuss hypertext and hypermedia. So, hypertext is what appears as clickable text, the links which we can click on. And hypermedia is, of course, the audio-visual forms. I discuss how the concept of hypertext and hypermedia has changed the way we produce and consume poetry on the internet. A few noteworthy points about hypertext are that it's non-linear, it's non-hierarchical, interwoven, and interlinked nature. This begins clear boundaries of beginnings and endings into question. So George Landau, in the 1960s only, he talked about the term hypertext actually predates the history of the internet and was coined by Ted Nelson in the 1960s to mean non-sequential writing, text that branches and allows choices to the reader best read at an interactive screen. Even before this, in 1945, Vannevar Bush envisioned the idea of a sort of literary machine where one could make links through associative indexing and add marginalia. So it's very interesting that the concept of hypertext is actually predates the internet, and people were already imagining linking texts and forming machines. The concept of hypertext can actually be linked to modernist texts. Modernist texts such as those by Virginia Woolf and James Joyce employ the stream of consciousness technique, move by association instead of by chronological linearity, and offer us multiple viewpoints as seen through the consciousness of various characters. It is common for 20th century texts not to give a concretized ending to the reader. According to Barthes, writerly texts are those which require active participation on the part of the reader to make meaning. Modernist texts as well as hypertexts can be seen as writerly texts. Hypertexts like Nishat, Haider ma'am was just talking about games in which you require agency. So a lot of engagement from the participant is required. Okay, so I don't know if I need to explain that a website is also called a domain. Links on the website can be intranodal, which means they lead to another page on the website, or internodal, which means they lead to another page on the website, on another website. And these whatever text is written on the website is fragmented, but it needs to be a complete whole, because at that particular point of time, it is the whole, that is the only text that the reader is reading. Hypertext is like Deleuze and Guattari's concept of the rhizome. It has no clear beginning and no end. It is not linear like a taproot, nor is it a circle where all spokes are attached to one center. In a rhizome, any point can freely flow and connect with any other point, as there are no fixed or rigid pathways. Flows can happen in any direction. Like, a rhizome is like bulbs and tubers form under the earth's surface, a mesh of interconnected roots with no clear beginnings or ends. According to Deleuze and Guattari, our brain is like, it makes associations and connections and flows in any direction. This brings to mind Nabina Das's poem When Kali Speaks for Us, where the clamoring voices of people are shown to be a mesh of roots with no origin. This seems to be remarkably similar to a rhizome. The voices of people come not from any one source, but democratically from multitudes of people. We may perhaps also say that these voices would flow in many directions like a rhizome, desire leading to desire. I think Tennyson's In Memoriam can be seen as a hypertext. Although there is a movement in the text from doubt to faith, one can gain any entry point into the text and still comprehend each individual poem perfectly. Hypertext works well with repetition, with a difference, for example, a pattern of poems on the same theme. A collection of letters, let us say, by Virginia Woolf is like a hypertext, because one can flip through the letters randomly without really reading the whole book chronologically. In that sense, I feel that a poetry book is also like hypertext. Hypertext fiction, which is written by people like Michael Joyce, offers different versions of a story through hyperlinks, different narratives, different perspectives, chronologies, and endings. So maybe in that sense, it is more like the games that she was talking about. Even ordinary websites such as Wikipedia, for example, comprise of hypertext, which is embedded with hyperlinks and which create a wide variety of pathways for the reader. As the reader is presumably not going to click on each and every hyperlink, every text is fragmented, and yet it needs to make complete sense to the reader. Hypertext is also multivocal, like Bakhtin's concept of heteroglossia. Hypertext contains within it polyphonous voices and comprises of different narratives. Hypertext threatens to turn literature into something completely different, as hyperlinks connect text to text, forming a web consisting of all of human cognition. In this interconnectivity, the role of the individual author will almost be annihilated. No wonder then that writers as well as literature departments have not welcomed the concept of hypertext very eagerly, as it would completely transform the concept of the book as we know it now. Again, academic texts are like hypertexts because, with the notes and annotations, they're not linear. So for example, and I refer to my own PhD thesis here, if my PhD thesis was to be written in hypertext, I could have linked to the full text of each and every poem instead of merely summarizing it or quoting fragments from it. Footnotes could have been expanded into full-length documents and themselves if written in hypertext. I had a problem with linearity. In a chapter on love poetry, I deal with touch as well as water, and a lot of poems dealt with both. It was hard to decide which path to follow. Although I tried to follow both simultaneously, hypertext would have allowed me to make intranodal links to all the water poems or all the touch poems together. Then a poem would speak of water, liquid, and taste, and it was a bigger dilemma whether to keep the water flow or to rupture the touch flow. A greater problem arose as when I had to use some of these poems for another section on systolic diastolic movement in love. So because of that, a lot of linearity could have been avoided if I had recourse to hypertext. Indian poetry in English has not made use of hypertext as much as it could have. There's hardly any, only the names of the poems and the poets are in hypertext. Otherwise, the poems themselves are not in hypertext at all. But it could do a lot, carrying forward the water example, one could have the word water in hyperlink in Sharanya Manivanan's poems, which on being clicked would lead to a drop-down menu or interface with hyperlinks leading to similar water poems by Priya Saruki Chabria, Anindita Sen Gupta, Udipana Goswami, and Rochelle Potkar. All the water poems could then be connected into one whole. So, theme-wise, we could have done it. I'll move on to the fact that hypertext also enables different modes of reading. Catherine N. Hales talks about, how hyper reading, machine reading is one thing, hyper reading, the way we scan text is another thing. And of course, the way we traditionally read a book is the third way, which takes a lot of time. And Deleuze and Guattari also, someone, they suggest that reading poetry on the internet is different because you read up and then you search for the words on the internet and you get extra meaning from them, and then you come back with that meaning to the poem. So there's an outward movement. From the poem to the internet where you search for meanings and references, and then a movement back to the poem where you apply the knowledge that you have got from the internet. Digital poetry is, also concrete poetry, which is shape poetry written in of the form of a shape. So again, this has not at all been used much in Indian poetry in English, but Meena Kandaswamy's poem about the Dalit girl and the pot of water is itself shaped in the form of a pot and is an example of concrete poetry. Priya Saruki Chabria's poem, The Husband, the Wife, and the Robber, has 3 different columns to show the viewpoints and narratives of all 3. So, 3 different columns. So that's a different kind of a way. How do you begin the poem and how do you end, or how do you read the poem? The question comes into. Question. Then again, the dichotomy between text and visual is broken because now text becomes something just as much to be looked at as to be looked through. The computer offers a wide range of fonts and colors that one can use, and they create different effects of play, seriousness, and so on. The size of the fonts and colors can be changed. Ekphrasis is a poem written for a painting or a photograph. We see Neetu Das writing several poems as ekphrasis, which means that these are poems written for visual paintings. So long before the internet, these things have been happening. I mean, Keats writes for aggression and so on. I'll have 2 major points more to say. One is audio recording.
We are actually running out of time. So if you could kind of wrap up, then we'll have more time for questions. But we have about 12 minutes still. in all, including questions.
I'll just make 2 more points, and I think I'll just speak rather than reading from this, so it'll take less time. Audio poetry is, again, poetry, reading, slam poetry, and so on, which are recorded on the internet, so it serves as a repository for these. But the question is, this Charles Bernstein in the US, who says that the body should be eliminated, and in poetry, the voice of the poet comes through when you only hear the voice and you don't see the body of the poet. But I would actually disagree, and a lot of other people also disagree, in the sense that if you look at Indian poetry, poets come with, like, the visual sense is also important. Like, even if it is Sharanya Manivannan sporting a bright red hibiscus in her mouth, it is a symbol of sexuality. Or women poets, when they speak, because how confessional poetry also began with Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton and so on, the body was very important when slam poetry also started. So in Indian poetry, whether it is the Shani Doshi combining elements of dance and yoga with poetry, or Arundhati Subramaniam's, who has the body of a dancer, the visuality somehow complements the poetry. The last point is again related to this point. It deals with, us becoming cyborgs. We are becoming cyborgs. Neetu Das's new second poetry collection is called Cyborg Proverbs, which shows that cyborgs is entering. Shumana Roy writes a poem about how the silence in a microphone, in the mic, is the same as the silence inside a tree. So, connecting with Donna Haraway and Catherine Hales connect with humans, plants, animals. There are no differentiations. They are erased. And also the differences with machines are erased. Many people are wearing specs. Specs have become a part of our body. Specs are a machine and as well as a part of our body. So, that in that sense, we are becoming cyborgs. Now, the question of how cyborg is affecting embodiment. So, again, human consciousness can be downloaded into a computer in today's age. So is that what we want? So people like Catherine N. Hales and Donna Haraway argue against this, and they say that no, we cannot, remove embodiment in order, like, does negotiating with computers and the internet means that our bodies are no longer important and it's only our voices or maybe even machine voices. So there is a view that embodiment is definitely important. For example, if I quote from another section of my PhD, if the internet allows me to act as a white woman, if the internet allows me to act as, not my identity as a white man, as I am queer, so if it allows me to act as straight, so the internet allows me all these, but is it beneficial for me to gain visibility at the cost of pretending to be a straight white man? So again, the importance of embodiment. Finally, people like Donna Haraway and Catherine N. Hale, sitting in first world countries, see technology as an unmixed blessing. They feel that this has empowered all women. But an Indian woman, Radhika Gajjala, talks about the fact that the women who are making microchips for these computers, third world women, poor women who are making microchips for these computers, in what way are they cyborgs? In what way are they really, they are the, most downtrodden part of the cyber world? In what way are they really benefiting from this whole thing? So what I basically try to do in my paper is to show that one is connections between people, of course, are happening due to internet. Connections between texts are also happening due to hypertext and links, and binaries are being broken down. Binaries between readers and writers are broken down. Binaries between the text and the visual is broken down, and between the, yeah.
So thank you, Shruti, for being for this interesting presentation, and also for being punctual. So we have quite a few questions already. So I'll just kind of ask these questions, and then I have a few of my own. But so Amartya Agrawal asks, even a lot of text adventure games use the logic of hypertext to allow players choice to decide their own adventure. That's like a comment, I think, but do you want to respond to this? It's more than a question, it's a comment, I think.
The logic of hypertext too. Yeah, that's true. They do. That's why I said that games that ma'am was referring to this paper also allow you to create your own story.
So, okay. So Juby asks, would you classify a space like Instagram representing a gift economy or a discourse community for Indian women's poetry? So Insta as
It's
a gift economy or discourse
both,
community.
Instagram, Facebook, all these, the whole uh, gamut of social media, journals, anthologies, awards. They are forming a discourse community where we all talk to each other within a space. Only people who are knowledgeable about poetry, it's creating a discourse community with people who are knowledgeable about poetry. Also, it is a gift economy.
So is it a discourse community or an echo chamber? I mean, well, discourse communities can be echo chambers and the other, but
Echo
I'm
chambers,
just
did
kind
you
of.
say? Network chambers might be.
No, I used the pejorative. I used the sense in echo chambers, as in the same thing, kind of like bouncing, and
I don't think it's an echo chamber because there are different voices. For example, this question of whether we should be paid for poetry or not, this itself is a debate. Should be in poetry be free on the internet for people to access, or should it be paid like everything else?
yes, interesting. So sorry, I'll let you answer the rest of the question. Sorry, I'm just kind of.
So a gift economy is something which only Instagram cannot form, but the whole network of all these platforms, what I basically meant by gift economy is that someone writes, someone publishes, a third person reviews the book. So it's kind of working in a gift economy. You know that the person who has reviewed your book, one day you will review the book for that person, that sort of thing. You know that one day what you are, in the ways in which you are helping the person, will somehow come back to you, not necessarily by the same person, not from the same person, but from the community. The community will be there to help you just as you have helped the community.
So I think we'll have another question. This is from Ruchi Nagpal, and she asks, Yusuf Saeed talks about the cult of YouTube mushairas in India's small towns. Can we see that as a gift economy? The YouTube mushairas in India's small towns.
That's a question. I don't know, because in the mushairas are the audience, the poets who are the audience, and the poets who are performing and the audience, are they separate? Because the gift economy is possible only when they combine together, when it's one community and they are all helping each other. But as long as the audience is at a separate space and the poetry is at a separate space, how can you form a gift economy? I don't know.
Okay, I have a question as well, which is a more technical question, theoretical question, in the sense of the use of the concept of the rhizome. What Deleuze and Guattari talk about is about kind of the rhizome intersecting planes rather than connecting points. The rhizomes intersecting, and they're different from the tree, the dendrite, because they don't connect points, they intersect planes. And which is why it is perhaps next to impossible to draw a rhizome. But with the hypertext, however, we are actually moving from one node to another. So like one hyperlink to another or a few others. So we are moving to a point-to-point kind of movement. So would you still see the hypertext as a rhizome, or would you see it as a dendritic, a tree-like structure?
I don't know, sir, because it is not really like a tree-like structure, because my text links to other texts. But if other texts also link to my text, then we can't.
So maybe we need to bring in the element of the experiential rather than just the linking from one to the other. Because if we are linking from one point to, let's say, three other points, that's like a tree-like structure. There are three options and three things.
Could
But
we
perhaps
say that the bricolage?
I don't know. What do you think? Do you want to see it as a bricolage? These are again things to think about. I mean, of course, very kind of interesting work. I mean, being done, well, like you mentioned, Kate Hales and others. And of course, it's also necessary to look at them from our from the South perspective, like Radhika Gajala and others have kind of talked about. But just a thought to think about whether, you know, how these are, if they are rhizomatic, then how they're rhizomatic, and what kind of things they involve.
So what you're trying to say is that you feel that it does have a starting point and then it branches off into.
Does it have rhizomes? Don't have a starting point. That's what
You're saying that
you know,
hypertext has a starting point.
and it kind of has a branching kind of structure. So point, and so on. So you so that's one kind of thing to think about, because there have been others who have described hypertext as rhizomes, but then it has been challenged as well in many. So maybe is something to think about. And I mean, to kind of like to speak on behalf of hypertext as rhizomes, I would say that there is the experiential part which we don't ignore, sorry, which we don't count when which we ignore when we are talking about kind of how, you know, hypertexts interact.
What do you mean by experiential part?
Like my experience of a particular thing. I mean, this, if this is a hypertext, and if I could go from this to another Zoom talk to another Zoom talk, the whole experience might be also changing tomorrow. If I could do the same thing tomorrow, my experience might be changing, right? Emotions, affect, all of these come in instead of a functional, a formal kind of interaction. But yeah, so anyway, but this is all kind of very interesting kind of things to think about, talk about, and we'll kind of again. Please join me in thanking Shruti Sareen for her fantastic presentation and raising so many ideas, and kind of connecting well. Internet, women writing on the internet, women's poetry on the internet, to kind of notions of kind of the rhizomatic and yeah, fascinating work. So could we kind of now move to the next presenter? We have Aibhi Biswas. Please do correct me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but she will be presenting on putting the local in the global, Indian graphic novels, the new vogue of the Indian writing in English. So the local in the global, Indian graphic novels, the new vogue of Indian writing in English. And Aibhi Biswas, who's done her BA and MA from Delhi University, MPhil on Magic Realism in Indian Cinema from the Central University of Haryana, and she is currently pursuing her PhD from the Central University of Haryana on the topic of Indian graphic novels, socio-cultural study. And Aibhi is interested in topics such as digital humanities, cultural studies, comparative literature, comic studies, film studies, popular literature. And she has written and presented papers on the topics such as anti-hero and in superhero movies, the villainess in popular cinema, homosexuality in Indian cinema, Indian comics for social awareness, along with, and she's also written a few poems. So over to Aibhi. Welcome to the conference, and we look forward to your paper.
Hello. Hello, sir.
Hi.
I'll be doing a PPT, so let me just share my screen.
May I request the host to please share the screen, give her permission to share screen. Yeah, thanks.
So as sir has already told, the topic of my paper is putting the local into the global, Indian graphic novels and the new vogue in Indian writing in English. The first, I would start, the first section of my paper is that there's an article by Suman Gupta which is titled Indian comic fiction in English, the publishing industry and the youth culture. So he says that Indian literature in English has been popular since 1988 from the publication of the books by Amitabh Ghosh. And then there has been a diversification in the form as well as the genre. Like it has branched into crime fiction and urban literature, etc. And one of the forms of it is also Indian graphic novels. He differentiates between Indian literary fiction in English and Indian commercial fiction in English. So Indian commercial fiction, Indian literary fiction, he says that it is more respectable, it has more critical value, cultural value, and it is internationally visible and accessible. Whereas Indian commercial fiction in English is like pulp fiction. It is written in a non-academic diction. It is entertaining. It is like gossip stuff, and it is particularly written for the domestic consumption. Though it has a globalized and post-colonial perspective. In this, the critic Claudia Kama, I don't know how to pronounce this, but anyways, she points out the fact that young Indian authors are kind of pressured to be the cultural ambassador of India by showcasing Indianness or exoticizing their works. But there have been cultural shift over the years due to internet and globalization of the world. India has been the center of divergent cultures, yet it has all been rooted to the origins. So the contemporary authors turn to localism, but they are aware of the greater globalization processes and their position within the local and global policies and economic structure of India. Therefore, they don't feel as pressured as the earlier generations. In the 2010s, since 2010s, Indian economy has had changes. So the Indian economy and the foreign policies have changed. It has led to some kind of slacking of restrictions in the publishing market. The focus of the entrepreneurship has been focused to domestic entrepreneurship, domestic innovations, etc., which has led to the entry of multinational publishing houses like Penguin, Routledge, Harper, Collins, etc. And it has also facilitated the establishment of Indian independent domestic, even small-scale publishing houses like Tara Books, Zuban Books, Baft, Liquid Comics, Jaco Books, Mantare Publishing, and these are particularly focused on publishing Indian graphic novels. Within this nucleus of power, this nucleus of publishing market, Indian graphic novels have risen and are popular. Recently, they have become more and more popular. Starting from the Jaipur Lit Fest, which was started in 2006, the lit festivals across India have increased to the number of over 90, like Pune Literature Fest, Hyderabad Literature Fest, etc. This has led to an establishment of a South Asian literary canon. And Indian graphic novels are a very important part of this South Asian literary canon. Moving on to the next slide. In this, we talk about Indian commercial fiction in English, which is popular. And in this, India has been turned into something kind of a brand. And this brand of India is very appealing to the international publishers. Indian graphic novels, which is a publication of this Indian commercial fiction, which is written in English. It has been successful in gaining leadership, and it is accessible to English speakers, which is kind of majority of the world, because it is a lingua franca. English is a lingua franca, so it has access to more readership. So it has been, these Indian commercial fiction has been included into international festivals, exhibitions, book fairs, and nominated for prestigious awards like the International Young Publishing Entrepreneurs Award. It was won by S. Anand's Navyana Publishing in 2007, which has also published very popular Indian graphic novels like Vimayana, Gardener in the Wasteland, etc. So Indian graphic novels is an Indian publication in English. Many popular Indian graphic novels have been created. Since it is a new form, it is interesting. It has managed to gain the attention of many foreign institutions and governments, which has given grants for the publication or the creation of very many popular Indian graphic novels like Corridor, Vimayana, Priya's Mirror. There's a critic called Joanne Petit. She says that in graphic novels represent the relationship between language, natural signifiers, and images that gives understanding at a universal level. So it is a combination, which in this form, there's a combination of all those recognizable images, very, very everyday used language, and images or situations are depicted in these graphic novels, which have an understanding which is universally understood. So global memory is presented using local and global tension. So this tension or intersection between the local and global is presented in these graphic novels, which makes these graphic novels quite interesting and successful globally. There is a graphic novel called Gardener in the Wasteland by Srividya Natarajan and Parajita Niman. In this, there are many instances. Specifically, I will mention page 1819. These are double pages spread. Page 1819, page 2021, and page 2425, in which there are many examples of connections between local and global memory, which depict a global landscape, which renders a global understanding, which means local and global, the intersection of local and global, basically. In the first pages, 1819, there is a depiction of Jyotiba Phule reading out The Rights of Man by Thomas Paine, and in which Thomas Paine kind of steps out like a holographic reflection from the book and reads out his own books. And the connection between the idols of those books and the situation of Dalits that is happening.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'm glad you liked the.
The rights of man and the connection that the situation of Dalits happening there, basically relating French Revolution, the bad condition of people under those that rule which was happening, or the revolt that was revolution that was happening at that period of time, is kind of encouraging the Dalits to also fight back. Then on page 2021, there is a line of revolutionary, which includes all these revolutionaries across the world, like Buddha, Nelson, and Marx, Socrates. All these people are shown, and these people are not placed chronologically. So it kind of says that these collective memories, or these collective instances, or these collective idols, they don't necessarily, it is across time and space. These are similar everywhere. So it is not, you cannot divide these between particular time zones or particular regions of history. They have the same idols, and they can be applicable to any period of time and any place across the globe. At the last page of the page number 24 and 25, there are instances of slavery shown, and there are instances of Dalits being oppressed shown. And at the corner, you can see that there is a Brahmin offering some kind of fruit to a KKK member. KKK member is like the Ku Klux Klan, which were the oppressors in the American South. So you can see that both these oppressors are the same. How they are oppressing people are the same. Their oppressive ideas, or them being in dominance, the idols they operate on are the same. So they are saying that it is, though slavery and caste system can be seen different, but they are idols, and their oppression of the oppressed party is the same. And the traumatic experiences experienced by the victims are also the same. So connective histories and connective trauma evoke a global relatability and empathy, and an understanding on a global scale via an alternative history and ethnic cultural grounding using visual literacy in Indian graphic novels, says critic Debashree. Graphic novel brings cultural collective memories of different people across the world, shared structures of inequality and governance, oppressive regimes, traumatic experience, creating relatable global space, invoking contemporary global awareness. So these are always relating, although these appear or talk about certain past events, these are always relating to the global situation, the present. Because if they are not relating to the present, they don't have any kind of relevance. Moving on, this is an example of the page number 1819 that was talking about how the holographic kind of Thomas Paine comes out from his own books and read out from his own books. Moving on to the next slide, we will talk about Priya Shakti. This is like a small, like a graphic novel, a small graphic novel, or a series of graphic novels. This was created by Ram Deveni, Vikas K. Menon, and art was by Diane Brown. This is a 3-part series. It includes Priya Shakti's Priya's Mirror and Priya and the Lost Girls. Since the first Priya Shakti was so appreciated and had achieved global acclaim, that it caught the attention of World Bank, which funded them to create Priya's Mirror under the We Evolve project, which was based on gender-based violence, which talked about gender-based violence issues like rape, sexual harassment, acid attacks, and human trafficking. Priya Shakti is available online. It is available online. It had more than 50,000 downloads globally. It is this comic book or graphic novel that you can say is free to download in India, and it comes with an app also, which is also free to download. Um, and it has achieved the title of Global Equality Champion by UN Women, and it has many features in exhibitions and festivals across the world in order to increase awareness against these gender-based violence acts across the world. Priya Shakti uses augmented reality through the Biplar app. This app comes free in India also. If through the app, if you scan certain pages of Priya Shakti or the comic book, there are pop-ups coming up with short interviews about the victims, animation, short stories, etc., which gives more information to the readers. It gives them a participatory and enhanced reading experience. Indian graphic novels straddle the literary and the pulp, the local and the global. Indianized English is used in this. Indian words, idioms, regional enunciations used without explanation, making it familiar, yet the themes and issues that they talk about are universally relatable. For example, Hindi onomatopoeia words like dhap, pring, chung, chak, chapak, etc. It's used in these Indian graphic novels, and it is for Indian consumption but has global potential. Visual narration in Indian graphic novels presents an local readers an easily consumable picture of Indianness and not exotic, which is not exotic, not too explanatory. Shows the modern globalized India. Indian English is for in India English, which is Indian English, is a pan-Indian language because India has different regional languages everywhere, which cannot be understood by the other parts of India. Therefore, English kind of joins all these people together. There was a survey conducted by Peter Rowling de Souza, which says that 33% of the population, literate population, is youth, out of which 25% read for pleasure and knowledge, and out of which 42% prefer to read it in English. Another survey, which was done in 2010 by Rakesh Shukla, says that 37% of the youth have access to internet and only 4% use it to read books online. This is an example of the Biplar app used, the augmented reality used through Biplar app to scan the pages of Priya Shakti, and you can like click photos with Priya using this app. Next slide we move on to. So Indian graphic novels use a domestic kind of English, but they're aware of global processes and influences. Indian graphic novels may seem satirical, funny, non-threatening, but they discuss serious, critical, sensitive issues like displacement, sexual exploitation, gender violence, oppressive regimes, environmental issues, terrorism, etc. On these themes, global campaigns can be carried out, and these themes are globally relevant and relatable. Indian graphic novels reflect general globalized contemporary English educated youth's perspectives and lifestyle, and the social, political, cultural background they come from, without hiding the underbelly and showing all the loopholes of the governance of the country they live in. Technological advancements, internet and devices made connectivity between authors, publishers, readers, and literary agents easier, faster, smoother, and more efficient. It facilitates the rise of domestic small-scale publishing houses like Bakt, Manchare, Pau Collective, Tara Books, Zuban Books, Navyana, Liquid Comics, Graphic India, etc. Indian graphic novels are a hybrid alternative storytelling form, combines art and writing. It is a popular cultural medium that helps in education, vocabulary development, cognitive development, communication, social cultural awareness, and knowledge gaining. Indian graphic novels internalize Western influences, reinvents traditional art and narrative forms, along with contemporary popular media influences like TV, cinema, radio, retains a cultural identity fitting into global economic, political picture. Penguin India digitally published Feluda graphic novels. Feluda is a very popular Bengali, like a comic character, not a comic character, but a book by Satyajit Ray, which is now done in a graphic novel version. And Campfire India also publishes a graphic novel version of Puffin Classics, which specifically targets NRIs who want to reconnect to their cultural roots. Graphic novel format also uses traditional Indian art, like it is done in Bhimayana, which is a very popular Indian graphic novel. Technological advancements help global accessibility and easier understanding and relatability. It showcases a globalized Indian national identity. Moving on to the next slide. Indian graphic novels represent contemporarily relevant, serious socio-cultural issues ignored by mainstream. Pramod Nair, for example, this is said by Pramod Nair, and one of the example of this thing is that the River of Stories graphic novel by Arijit Singh, which is about the Narmada Bachao Andolan, the displacement of Adivasis, and it raises a greater global environmental movements question about whose development is it, about ecological balance, about does who's development, like who benefits from these kind of large governmental development projects, and what is the cost, that is at what cost are we paying for this development. And for another example is Bhimayana, which introduces global leaders to the complex concept of caste in an easy, relatable, intriguing way. Gain global empathy and tries to gain global empathy and support for the oppressed Dalits in India. Indian graphic novels connect to the person with political domain. There's a constant intermingling of local and global. The microcosm and the microcosm and the macrocosm are also intermingled.
We're actually kind of just 10. We have 10 more minutes, so
yeah. Okay, sir.
then we can leave some time for questions.
Yeah. Yes, sir. I'm just wrapping up. Okay, so as I was saying that one of the examples of this is Vishwajyoti Ghose's Delhi Calm, in which the main protagonist VP is more worried about his monthly salary not coming rather than the emergency imposed. And this theme is relatable to anybody else who has faced some kind of lockdown. It is now relatable to everybody who has faced a worldwide lockdown because of Corona. So mass media and social networks, digital services are used by the middle class, and this is taken advantage by publishers and authors, because now Indian graphic novels are published online. These are accessible on global platforms and raise globally relevant and locally connected issues. They reinvent traditional ideas and celebrate hybridity. So this wants to show a post-millennial kind of identity, a modern identity of India in the post-millennial production system and distribution. But these are trying to show the greater process that are happening behind the production, consumption, and distribution of Indian graphic novels. And these are constantly trying to negotiate between the other mass media forms like TV, cinema, etc., and trying to make it a special space within the literary world as well. It has competence and power on a global platform because it is written in English. Indian graphic novels is like reading a graphic novel is a participatory kind of active participation by the readers. It requires active participation by the readers. So it definitely impacts the socio-political consciousness of the readers. It encourages alternative thinking, questions traditional constructs like gender role, patriarchy, etc. Though these construct fantastical worlds, but they have recognizable situation and object. Therefore, they are relatable. They use traditional tropes like acceptance, determination, etc., but they don't earn for a space in the social mainstream. Media rather challenges established structures and encourage new ways of thinking, urge readers for solutions and changes. So in this also, there are three graphic novels that I mentioned, Koido, Kari, and the Harappa Files, shows a middle-class Indian lifestyle, the disillusionment of the contemporary reality, how your identities are fragmented, and how your personal life or a personal life of individual is interlaced with the country's socio-political issues. The themes are easily applicable to any other country. It requires, as I said, it requires active participation, and it also requires an intelligent, mature audience from, it expects an intelligent, mature audience because it poses itself as a sophisticated form. So it is trying to break out from its niche readership of comic books and graphic novels, and it is trying to gain more general readers who are mature and intelligent, who can decipher all these references that are embedded into Indian graphic novels. And technology, like a critic, James Carter says that technology provides an intersection between graphic novels, young adults, literacy, education, and creates new spaces beyond the panels of traditional printed media or printed books. New forms create new spaces, the new greater social spaces form where creators can share their work online. They can promote it and preview it and gain more audiences. Social spaces like blogs, websites, etc. are very, very helpful and advantageous to the creators, publishers, as well as readers, because they can connect to the authors directly in a more intimate and immediate way. And authors can also preview their work, gain readership. They can also fundraise for printing a printed book. If these works are all available online, they can fundraise to print a real book. Or they can catch the attention of publishers who will approach them to print it in reality. One example of this is how Kokachi is also a very is a like a domestic Indian graphic novel publishing house, which is run by Tina Thomas and Prateek Thomas. So Tina Thomas says that they published a preview of Mixtape Anthology, which is an Indian graphic novel anthology, and it was so popular online, which is well received online, that they decided to print it.
Yeah.
We have actually, we are running out of time, so
Okay.
we have quite a few questions for you. Would you just wrap up so that we
Yeah,
can at least take some of the questions?
Yeah, just one slide is left, so I'll just. Yeah, so as I was saying that it has an Indian sensibility. It has compact language. It retains longer. It resonates longer Indian graphic novels because because of the form, the visual narration. Okay. It provides a greater contact zone. Even publishers say that digital form is well suited for the comics medium, since they can reach a wider audience, and the experience is more multimodal. The reading becomes more multimodal. It has interactive engagement. It is now exploring new spaces, expanding reading to interactive apps, games, and animation. Okay, so that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have a few questions here, if you would like to take them.
Sharing this.
So the first question is, do graphic novels deploy digital tools? This is from Professor Zaidi.
Sorry, deploy?
Do graphic novels deploy digital tools?
Didn't understand. What do you mean by digital tools?
Do graphic novels use digital media, or kind of they do
they? Yes, they do use digital media. There's already there's 18 days. If you can see, it is by, I don't remember the name, but it is on YouTube. It is called 18 days. So it has like not complete animations, but like very slow motions. So it does employ digital, technological advancements within it.
So just a follow-up question again, how is the digital text different from the printed text of a graphic novel?
I guess it is more interactive, and like a traditional book, you will like take it and read it. But while if you are reading it on an iPad, or if you're reading on a tab, you can like enlarge the images. If there are technological, digital tools, as you said, are integrated in it, then the experience become more multimodal. So yes, definitely there is scope for it.
So the multimodality and interactivity.
Yes.
And okay, then Jubi has asked if you could please comment also on how embodiment is represented in graphic novels. Embodiment represented in graphic novels.
Like embodiment in like what terms?
I'll let Jubi explain. She's yeah.
Yeah, as in when you talk about the body, or even if the female body, how do you exactly talk about? Do you talk more about it in words or in the way that you're drawing it?
I will say that it is for different graphic novelists, different thing matters. For some graphic novelists, the text is more important. For example, if you talk about Kari, which is done by Amrita Patil, okay.
Yes,
for
exactly.
her, she says that I first think the text and then the images come to me. Okay, so it is different for all, but I will say it is an amalgamation of both, through the text as well as incorporation of the amalgamation of text as well as the images. A different kind of persona is presented, and as I told you, it is challenging traditional traditional concepts or traditional stereotypes. So gender roles, patriarchy, these are all challenged within Indian graphic novels. If you talk about Kari only, that woman, the protagonist Kari of the graphic novel Kari, she cuts her hairs and she's like, she's almost tomboyish. So she's challenging the feminist kind of role. Okay. And plus she is also seen as a lesbian, like she's depicted as a lesbian. So the heteronormal society is also challenged.
I think we are running out of time. We have quite a few questions, but I think it's also time to kind of move on to our next speaker. So I would like to invite Samya Brata to kind of present his paper and just kind of Samya Brata Roy from the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, is going to present a paper on Hitman 2 and its spectre of Mumbai, a city lost in translation. And Samya Brata is currently in the second year of his MA in English Literature from the English and Foreign Languages University in Hyderabad. He's working as the facilitator of the SIG called Digital Objects and Media for the Digital Humanities group in India, Dharti. And academically and theoretically, his interests lie in and around the modalities of digital narratives. Via praxis, he has got exposure in the field of disability studies by assisting in a research project. He is also interested in teaching, and in order to pursue the same, he has been teaching slum kids adjacent to his university and assisting Dr. Rajshekhar Vijeshwarappu of FLU as well. So over to Samya. Well, welcome to this conference, and we look forward to your paper. Again, I request all the members of the audience to please kind of type your questions in the question session.
Yeah, so may I start? Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, so I'll be sharing my screen. All right, so is my screen perfectly visible now?
Yes, it is.
All right, thank you. So as you can see, my paper is titled Hitman 2 and its Spectre of Mumbai, a city lost in translation, where I will basically be talking about the problematics of depiction of Mumbai in this particular mission in Hitman 2. One thing that I would like to say at the outset is that my presentation, the images or whatever, is just to aid what I speak. It doesn't contain exhaustive information. It is just meant for certain visual aids. And that is all. So now, I would like to start with my first slide about the good old DL Orient. I kind of had this idea to conjoin the two words because of the abundance of yellow filters. It's very irritating for me as a viewer. So as a text, we're very familiar with Oriental depiction, the exoticization of Oriental culture. The Monkey's Paw by W.W. Jacobs is one of the best examples. We have countless examples littered through literary history, which has exotic notions starting from Andrew Marvell to very recent texts as well. But what about other forms of media, which is more recent than the text? Not only the more recent, but the more recent forms of recent media, like games or films. But we see no better. For example, in this production by the fabled Russo brothers, the Extraction or the game that I'm talking about, it uses the same yellow tropes of exoticizing and that mystique of the Orient. So in this particular depiction of Mumbai, this is what I am trying to show, how that the same old stereotypes come into play, and that it's not really what you would call a very I wouldn't think that realistic is a nice way to put it, but yeah, it's not very nice as an Indian gamer to encounter such depiction. Okay, so now first of all, I will be talking about my methodology here. So for my methodology, I have used Andre Brock's critical technocultural discourse analysis. Now, just a little note, Brock uses this idea to study Black experience in Twitter, but I am kind of decontextualize it to apply it here in case of my paper. So what he does is he applies it twice. Number one is properties of the media, and number two will be the actions the actions that take place inside the media. So I have divided that into two rather arbitrary facets to explain the topic at hand better, into depiction and interaction. Now, what do I mean by depiction and interaction? Depiction means that when you just stand in the gaming space, when you look around, or the various tenets of the gaming of the mission, which is crucial, which you cannot ignore, which is absolutely necessary, which you cannot at all ignore, is what I am talking in the depiction point. In interaction point, I'm delving in a little bit deeper to talk about how you operate in the gaming space and how different things start to appear as you move around, as you listen a little closer. There are certain things which appear to you rather problematic in the guise of realism. So these are the two ways in which I have divided it, and this will be my approach. So the first thing will be the depiction which I was talking about. And at the outset, it is good to mention that there are a few works which I am indebted to, which I will come to eventually. Soraya Murray's work is the most important in case of mine. Her work interconnects cultural studies and game studies, and it has been extremely important in developing my argument. So I would just kind of like to summarize what these critics say. Murray says it would be a mistake to reduce modern day video games to military simulations and players of games to passive receptors of mass media. The origins of games do not necessarily define the limits of their potential. However, they do play a powerful role in the capacity to imagine that what might be possible and how we understand the world and our relations within it. Now, I am interpreting her word origins of games as something which the makers, the designers, intended to encode, and borrowing this from Stuart Hall's Encoding and Decoding. And then I move on to the notion of Espen Arset's concept of spatiality, and how he says that the defining element in computer games is spatiality and how we negotiate with that concept. Now here, as you can see that I have used this symbol of Far Cry 4, and you can see that the silhouette of the elephant is here. Now, why the origins of the word, the origins is not the be all and end all? Because in Far Cry 4, we can see very interestingly, who are supposed to be Nepali people speaking in fluent Hindi, and that becomes problematic. So it is supposed to be taken at face value, but the origins do not necessarily define the limits of the potential. And therefore the decoding does not stay limited to that aspect, and it goes beyond it. And also, last but not the least, I have referred to Nezar Al-Sayad's work here. And he refers, imagine if there was no real New York or Los Angeles to trace what's left of them, and the only thing we have are films that depict them as a background of the cinematic story. What kind of history do we write? I kind of want to contextualize the same idea, but in the case of games. Now, we might wonder, how is this possible? Is this at all possible? But I would like to point out a small notion where it has been possible. The famous Cathedral of Notre Dame was terribly damaged, and they used the digital modeling present in Assassin's Creed Unity to rebuild it, in a sense of the term. They took 14 months to digitally model the Notre Dame when it was all right, basically. So this is what a positive digital modeling would look like. What I'm trying to imagine here, what if a kind of this essentialist and a reductivist notion of cultural depiction is encoded or displayed? Then what kind of a recreation would take place? Will that not be perverted in nature, so as to speak? All right. So here I will be basically showing some pictures and trying to decode the ideology that is prevalent here in the mission and how that plays out with the whole gaming experience. So this is the mission in brief. This is the screen that you are greeted to when you start the mission. So you have to find this elusive maelstrom, which you don't know the identity of, and his gang is called the Crows, which I will come to later on, which is very important. And then Vanya Shah, who I will also reflect on later on, Vanya Shah and Dawood Rangan, hilariously named guy. It seems that the makers of this game are still stuck in the 90s. But well, we move on. Okay, now going to the first important character which is to be killed in this mission is Vanya Shah, who calls herself as the self-styled queen of the Bombay slums. Now this is a very funny, this is not even problematic. It seems funny to me because there is a peacock. It's blue. People are like waving her with a fan, and it seems exotic. It seems like a cheap rip-off from a scene from a bad adaptation of Midsummer Night's Dream. Her security guards are wearing full sherwanis. I mean, I just don't see the efficiency here. And here you can see that Agent 47, who's the protagonist, Hitman, is dressed as a tailor. This impersonation is also something that I will hint on later, that how Agent 47, being a white man, is so adept at taking up roles which is not exclusive to the cultural space that he inherits. Now moving on, as I talked about the Maelstrom, and this is the gang of the Maelstrom called the Crows. Now once again, this is also very funny to me because if you can see a little closely, here we have, yes, you have understood that correctly, skulls of crows hanging from place to place everywhere, and literal dead crows hanging to signify the crows. Now this is what I would call a literal rotten signifier. I understand that a gang can be called crows or they can use exotic imagery, but hanging actual skulls of crows in the streets to signify their dominion, wow, that is a little too much for me to take, to be honest. This is something that is not limited to this space, by the way. These crow skulls can be seen throughout the space, and that is what even it makes more ridiculous and interesting at the same time. Where do they get so many crows, I wonder. Next, after I talked about the encoding and the first part of the depiction, now I will go into the interaction and the notion of decoding, the second step. Here I will start by talking about the aspect of perform, possess, and pass. So what I mean here is Agent 47 being a white man or the general Anglophonic gamer, when they are playing this mission, they can be the tailor, the laundryman, the barber. And I would like to refer here to Lisa Nakamura's notion of identity tourism, that without the complexities of the phenomenological experience, they can pass around as whoever they want. Because it seems ridiculous to me that this white, tall person can so seamlessly blend in as a barber, as a tailor, whatever. I understand the notion of suspending this disbelief, but sometimes it gets a little too much, to be honest. Now, when I go a little bit deeper into the micro space, it is also important to note that the barber, the posing up as the barber or as the dhobi is not essential. You can ignore that, but that comes up as optional elements of play in the mission. Now, this is when you explore a little further, go a little deeper into the gaming space, and I found out that there is a cyber cafe over here. Now, this is where I intend to ask, what exactly are we playing here? Because this to me seems odd, because I have been playing games for as long as I can remember. And I remember when I was very small, I saw an arcade machine in a game parlor. We used to call them game centers and game parlors like that. And these people making this game, which is situated in the current context, in a place, in the suburban place in Mumbai, inside Mumbai, and they have so many arcade machines and so many computers as well. It seems a little ridiculous to me that this little bit of research also has not been done. The next part for me is even more hilarious. Now, this to me absolutely takes the cake, and this is where I came up with the title, that A City Lost in Translation. And this is like a nomenclature, obviously. I can't get rid of bad puns. So here, if you pay a little attention towards the names of the shops, and something also that I would like to talk about, a bakery shop is called Bakery Roti. A shop which sells chicken is called Chicken Bhojan. A garment store is just called Kapda. Now, a tea shop is called Chai Dukan. Now, what they have done is they have translated tea shop directly into Hindi and just pasted whatever that comes with it. While I appreciate their skill of trying, but this seems a little too much for me to take. I mentioned about Dawood Rangan and the hilariously outdated naming that is there, but it's okay, that can be done. But it's also an important point to be noted here that Daud Rangan is a movie producer. And when you go to his mansion, which is being constructed, very interestingly enough, NPCs in the mission talk about his other productions, and they have hilarious names like Blundering Frights, The Snake and the Mongoose. Had it been something like a satirical representation, I would have been fine with it, like a GTA, for example. But when I play in other gaming spaces, I do not find such blatant, exoticizing a culture or putting very minute artifacts. But here I see such a hilariously named fictional film inside the gaming space called The Snake and the Mongoose. Now, the last thing is also very interesting to me, is what I call out of fit. Is that you can see Agent 47, the protagonist here, he is wearing an outfit which is very common to us Indians. But when these NPCs see Agent 47 in the streets, they act as if they are seeing such a dress for the first time in their lives. Oh, what a strange dress he is wearing. I'm not even coming to the accent. It's okay, it's fine. But this is a strange dress to you guys, seriously? While Daud Rangan marches around and his cronies march around wearing exactly the same dress. No one bats an eyelid. But when the white man is wearing something, it suddenly becomes strange, which is also very strange to me. Moving on. So moving on, last but not the least, before getting into my final tenets and certain other issues, is that I want to hint at the fact that is the mission really accomplished then? Is the mission at all accomplished? I think that this is like Daud Rangan's unfinished tower. It is impressive, but it is unfinished. Because when you go on top of Daud Rangan's tower, you see the Mumbai skyline and you see the high rises and all the things, but they are not implemented inside the gaming space. I was having an argument with a friend of mine who also happens to be an avid gamer, and he was of the opinion that I understand your argument. But you have to also understand that when gamers are trying to depict Brazil or India, they will choose the favelas and the slums because those are markers of culture. I understand what point he is making. And I also understand the point when people say that the yellow filters are given in order to signify the tropical culture or the polluted spaces, which I won't deny. But what my point is that it could be more inclusive and it could be a little bit more nuanced and not so much on the face, especially from artifacts which are so recent. So yeah, that's all that I had to share. Now I would conclude. I will just wrap up all the points that I had in order to bring it to a conclusion. When I say that this reads like, when I say that it reads like a city lost in translation, what I mean is when you read a novel in your own language, in the mother tongue, and then you read a badly translated novel in another language, English, for example, when you read an English translation of a very popular Bengali text, and you can understand that the translation is very poor. When you play as an Indian gaming space, a place that you have inhabited, and when you see it, the city reads like a bad translation, and the city becomes lost in the said translation. This is the point that I had to make, and in order to make this point, I used Andre Brock's critical technocultural discourse analysis in order to point out the essentialist gaze which reduces a culture to a techno-orientalist commodity. Okay, so yeah, thank you. And before I actually sign off, I would like to acknowledge some people. I believe I have a little time. I have around 2.5 minutes, I believe. There are some people that I would like to acknowledge because I have been playing games for the longest time that I can remember, and this is the first time that I have ever dared to write an academic paper on this. The first person that I would like to acknowledge is Dr. Dipoduti Roy. 5 months ago, I imagined writing a paper, and he was very helpful to me in order to help me fine tune my argument and everything for that matter. Then I would like to thank Dr. Thomas Apperley. He suggested me in a casual conversation that I look into the book by Soraya Murray. And then I would also like to thank my junior Shayan Mukherjee and Dr. Ashok Sengupta for giving me very valuable inputs. Dr. Prakash Kona for extending the deadline of my midterm assignment so that I could finish the paper. Dr. Souvik Mukherjee, because I was introduced to the field when I was a schoolboy from his writings. And last but not the least, the organizers, and especially Nishat ma'am, for being so fabulous and so patient. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Samya, for your very interesting presentation. I think now the floor is open to questions. We have 11 minutes, and I think there are 2 questions already. So the first one is from Jubi, where she asks, don't you think this Orientalist theatricality is very mainstream in other mediums as well, like J.K. Rowling choosing Indian names such as Parvati Patil and the hideous dresses they wore for the ball, or even Coldplay's song Hymn for the Weekend? The video is filled with dilapidated buildings, kids playing holy, religious leaders roaming around. Do you think this gaze will be modified in any way? So, yeah.
So the first thing is talking about J.K. Rowling. Well, she has become the greatest example of a tragic heroine in recent times. But aside J.K. Rowling, yes, I absolutely agree with your comment on Coldplay's Hymn for the Weekend. I love that song, but the video is something that I absolutely do not like, especially because one particular scene actually shows a man levitating, which is so funny to me. Not even problematic, it's in the realm of funny. So yeah, I would think that yes, there will be even more Oriental depictions as we go, because this is easy eyeball grabbing and any publicity is good publicity. So I believe that this essentialist depiction will be there, and but I believe nuanced works are there to follow. Yeah.
So, well, the next question is exoticization and stereotyping of the Orient is very prevalent in Western depictions of the East. How does this then hit differently when gaming? This is from Neha Bhattacharya.
Okay, so it hits different in gaming, especially because of the fact of interaction and playability as far as it is concerned. Because it's interesting that when I'm playing a mission, when I'm playing with the mindset of completing a particular mission or getting the particular target, I'm not focusing on whatever the NPCs are speaking about, because I have to go forward with the story. But when I'm playing it for a second time, and now I just want to play around the gaming space and I want to listen in to what people are saying, it is at these points that I hear people saying all those interesting dialogues, and it becomes even more interesting, because then it hits you that all these lines have been written and they have been encoded in the whole rhetoric that's in place. So they have minutely written these lines, being fully aware that these are, I have to say, funny and problematic for that matter.
Okay, we have another question, which is, would you classify Uncharted Lost Legacy as a nuanced depiction of India? And if so, what in your opinion demarcates the two?
I have not played Uncharted Lost Legacy, hence I will refrain from commenting. So I'm very sorry that I was unable to answer your question.
In which case, I shall also add that the Uncharted games have a history of kind of doing something similar, because if you look at the last Uncharted game, it is based on the stealing of the Great Mogul's treasure by the pirate captain Jack Avery. So again, the whole premise of the game is based on how pirates stole treasure and how that treasure is to be reclaimed. But it's a good thing. It's a good thing to steal back the Great Mogul's treasure. So in a way, kind of. But I also wanted to ask you. Siddhartha Chakraborty has an essay on Hitman as well.
Yes.
where Hitman is kind of, again, in the Hitman series, the
That is
Golden
the older mission, the Golden
it's
Temple.
it's a much older game. So
Yes.
why? But do you think there's something about this Hitman games that they kind of either speaks, and and there's something in this Hitman, the logic of this Hitman games that
Yes.
is so Orientalist.
Yeah, I think that that is also even more important because of the game mechanics and the haptics that is
That's
involved.
what I was asking. Yes.
Because in games like Tom Clancy and Hitman, where stealth is so important, the spectacle of the game lies in the fact that how can you kill? Are you poisoning a bowl of fish? Are you throwing someone off a balcony? So they have explored Miami. They have explored a place like some other American space or London. Now, a space is built only for the white man to come and kill. And it is even more interesting because the history of Agent 47 is that he was created in a laboratory. The older Hitman games, he was created in a lab, and the fact that he is slowly gaining consciousness of his own self. Hitman 3 is coming out very soon, and this deals upon this particular aspect. So this is very much like the colonial British soldiers gaining consciousness of the fact that they are actually being played by their uh, 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 kings and the emperors, that they don't do anything. They are sent to a space to kill. And at some point of time, they realize, hang on, what's happening? It's not right. So I believe Hitman also becomes a meta representation of a colonial soldier for that matter.
So what do you think should kind of game developers do differently? What do you think for yourself? I mean, or let me put it in a different way. If you were to make a Grand Theft Auto Bombay or Mumbai, excuse me, then what would you do? How would you kind of, yeah?
Yeah, so the first things first is it's curious that you mentioned Grand Theft Auto, because Grand Theft Auto has this inherent notion of satire that is built into it. So,
Yes, that's why I mentioned there is a Grand Theft
yeah,
Auto Punjab, which we might have
there is
seen.
a Punjab, yeah, and there is that infamous GTA Vice City Bangla, which
Yes,
we were
yes.
playing. Uh, hilarious lines, something that I can't say really here, but in those spaces, I would expect the developers to include the very stereotypical elements, because I am conscious of the fact that they are making fun. That is something happens when I watch an Amazon Prime series like The Boys. When someone decapitates a blind person and screams at other person that, what do you think, you want to include a disabled person just in order to fulfill the inclusivity quota? I understand the satire that they're trying to do. So if it is something like GTA, I would expect all the stereotypical elements to be a part of the gameplay.
Dr. Mukherjee, if you permit, can I add on to your question?
Of course.
Right, right. So Shambo, great presentation. I really enjoyed it. I think it was
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you for the acknowledgement, but I think it was mostly you who did the groundwork and everything. I have a couple of questions which are more sort of questioning of myself, right? So use this term of suspension of disbelief, correct? So I think that's the point where there is a ludological versus narratological dissonance in the overall gaming structure. So my question is, the part that I was really interested in, and we've discussed this somewhat, the idea of the white man coming and gaining consciousness, right?
Yes.
To be sort of a pastiche rather than a parody, right? Why I call it a pastiche is because in effect of the white man's burden, it is in fact the white man's burden which has been taken up by the colonized, because we are now giving it consciousness, right? So,
yes, right.
So the laboratory consciousness is being now humanized. So I just wanted your thoughts on it, not a question. Your and Dr. Mukherjee's thoughts on this, just as a query myself. Thank you.
I think this is very interesting, because we kind of see these, I like that term laboratory consciousness, because this is very important also in the character of Wolverine in X-Men. We see this in Wolverine, we see this in Agent 47, and now I can't recall that there is. So
Jason Bourne?
In Jason Bourne, obviously, in the Bourne trilogy, in the fantastic first film, which is very enjoyable. So yeah, so the whole aspect of the memory coming back and they realizing, oh my God, what's happening to me? I find it very interesting for that matter. So yeah, Dr. Mukherjee, if you'd like to add on to that.
So I'm kind of intrigued by the very fact that in certain cases, the landscape, India or the people of India and whatever they understand by India is just absent. Really, it's there, but it's just kind of. And the classic example is Call of Duty, where there is an
Yes.
entire kind of battle fought by the Russians and the Americans in
Yes.
Himachal
There is
Pradesh,
no Indians.
and there is no Indian.
There is
So
no
there's just one
Indians.
shop which says Daru Ka Dukan, and like your examples, and there is one shop which has a kind of a misspelt name and all that. So
Yes.
this is kind of, again, which is what I kind of talk about. And when you talk about the laboratory consciousness, they seem to wake up as if in a place where everything else is absent. But
Yes.
Shamo and Dr. Mukherjee, if you saw, the shop that had the cyber cafe was called Arakshan, because it's
yes,
reservation is done in those shops for railway, whatever. So the
yes,
kind of imaginary that comes into play.
yes,
Yes. Yes.
So yeah,
Also.
I just thought, yeah.
yes. So well, I think well, we've had such a fantastic session, kind of whole kind of session this afternoon. I'm kind of thank all the presenters. We started with video games and we're ending again with video games in India, and again video games and Bollywood as connect, because there's and there's all these fantastic presentations, graphic novels, and kind of poetry in the internet. So thank you all, and I also thank the organizers for letting me be part of it. So thanks. Over to the organizers. Jubi, over to you.
Right. Thank you so much, Souvik sir, and each of the presenters. I think it was a lovely discussion, and we ended on a good note. I think we're now moving on to the next session, I believe. So over
Yes.
to
Yes. Thank you, Jubi. It's 4 o'clock, so we are right on time for the plenary. I'm handing the mic to Grace and Stephen now, and they'll be the ones who'll be handling this session. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you, Zara. I welcome you all to the plenary. So we have three presenters for this session, and our chair is Dr. Debashree Roy. Dr. Roy is an accomplished scholar and educated with over 10 years of experience working in multidisciplinary academic environments across USA, UK, and India. He has a public-facing publication profile with core research specializations in digital humanities, new media studies, and theories of masculinity and gender. His inclusive critical pedagogy across undergraduate, graduate, and executive education programs encourages critical thinking through extensive independent research, evidence analysis, and contextual awareness. His current research interrogates the intersections of caste and digitality in the global south, on which he recently organized and presented a panel with his students at the MIT flagship conference, Media in Transition, as a founding member of the Digital Humanities Alliance for Research and Teaching Innovations, previously the Digital Humanities Alliance of India. He co-organized the first digital conference in India. So over to you, Dr. Roy.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. I think there's a lot of friends and usual suspects in this space. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the wonderful initiative being taken by Professor Zaidi and Jamia. I've been privileged to speak at it at a previous iteration, and I'm really, really excited to see all the papers and see the wonderful conversations, especially because most of the papers deal with archives today. And I think this is a very interesting conversation because I am reminded of that wonderful paper by Kate Thymer when she talks of the fact that she, as an archivist, when she goes into the nation of digital humanists, archives have a different connotation altogether, right? So so without further ado, I think we'll start off with the first paper. So we'll try and keep the questions in the chat box if that's okay, and we'll try and acknowledge the questions at the end of the panel if that's all right.
Yes.
I would like to, yeah. And Grace, please help me out if I take a
Yeah,
mistake.
I'll time you. Yeah.
Right. So we are very, very privileged and happy to welcome Dr. Debashree Roy, Dr. Parthasarathi, and Dr. Reema Chaudhary. So the first paper today is Dr. Debashree Roy's paper on archiving communities' voices in Karbi, Anglong, collective memory and digital apprehensions. Dr. Roy is Associate Professor in Comparative Literature and Deputy Coordinator, Center for Canadian Studies at Jadavpur University, Kolkata. Welcome, Dr. Dattaray. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. Good afternoon, everyone. Very nice to see, known, and some faces that I hope will be better known soon. Thank you to Professor Zaidi for inviting us. It's a privilege to be here. And thank you to the organizers for organizing such an elaborate conference with such wonderful speakers together. So thank you very much. So I will start with my paper. I probably have a presentation in a while, which I will show, but before that, let me begin with the word apprehensions. And I think I'm very concerned about that word because I work with Indigenous studies majorly, and I think that's where, and in Indigenous studies, the word research, as we know, is suspect. It's in fact, as Linda Tuhiwai-Smith tells us in Decolonizing Methodologies, is the dirtiest word in the Indigenous Words Dictionary. So, and words such as mapping, space, explorations, which are associated with the idea of cyberspace, with the idea of the digital world, are words that have been very suspect in the Indigenous context. And I think that's one of the reasons that one felt the need to deal with it. Loretta Todd tells us, who is this Indigenous filmmaker, she tells us, will cyberspace enable old knowledge to be experienced and expanded, or will cyberspace create the present anew each day, so that there never again is tradition or a past? So Indigenous scholars, as we know, have resisted digital humanities for a very long time because the concerns of Indigenous communities have been about expropriation of data, which have not really been taken seriously for some time. So things are changing at the moment. And of course, what one needs to understand, and I'm hoping that the keynotes that follow would address that, is the decolonial critique, which needs to be foundational to DH theory and methodology. And really non-Indigenous scholars, such as I and other people, need to also take up some of the responsibility of working with Indigenous studies on one hand and the digital world on the other hand. Some early books that came out, and I think, is Transparence, Tradition, Technology, Native New Media Exploring Visual and Digital Culture in 2006, which was edited by Dana Claxon, Teethan Lott, and Melanie Townsend. And it looks into the intersections of Indigenous art history and new media practices. We've also had Coded Territories Tracing Indigenous Pathways in New Media Art in 2014, which is by Steve Lott and Kerry Sonson. And you've also had a text which is called Indigenous Art, New Media and the Digital, which came out in 2016, and which basically highlighted the historic and ongoing use of technology by Indigenous communities and artists as vehicles of resilience and cultural continuity. I'll come back to that in a moment at a later point. And in fact, Mohawk artist Kwenapi and Cherokee scholar Jason Lewis tells us is that if Aboriginal people learn one thing from contact, it is the danger of seeing any place as terra nullius, even cyberspace. Its foundations were designed with a specific logic, built on a specific form of technology, and first used for specific purposes. But basically allowing military units to remain in contact after a nuclear attack. The ghosts of these designers, builders, and prime users continue to haunt the blank spaces. In the context of the US Indigenous Data Sovereignty Network, because we're also talking about intellectual property rights over here, and the Indigenous nations, Indigenous communities have had a long history of exploitation when it comes to that, is that Indigenous data sovereignty is the right of a nation to govern the collection, ownership, and application of its own data. It derives from tribes' inherent right to govern their peoples, lands, and resources. This conception of data sovereignty positions Indigenous nations' activities to govern data within an Indigenous rights framework. And as an institution, the academia has for the very, very, very long time, I mean, be it with Ainus in Japan, with communities in South Africa, with communities in India, Indigenous data has basically worked towards the needs and desires of mainstream motivations and proclivities of the state. So the removal and non-consensual dissemination of data is, of course, it's justified under these new enlightenment demands for knowledge, and which is basically information wants to be free, is very suspect in the indigenous world. In recent times, you've had other articles and other projects which have come up in the digital humanities world with respect to indigenous studies. You've had Plateau People's Web Portal, the Native Land Digital, Recoding Relations, which is basically a brief podcast series on indigenous new media and the politics and potential of the digital humanities. You've also had Just Fem Things, which is basically a podcast by Lindsay Nixon for the Indigenous Digital Humanities Lab at Ryerson University. We've also had Indigi TikTok, which is a TikTok account led by Indigenous content creators and supported by the Center for Digital Humanities, again at Ryerson. Within this context, you also have Ryan Mahon, who's an Anishinaabe comedian and writer based out of Ottawa, Toronto, and he has these several podcasts which are very well known and have also worked very strongly during the COVID-19 situation. And the ones that we are talking about is Thinking Indigenous, which is again by Ryan, and also redmanlaughing.com. Basically Red Man Laughing. So these are series of podcasts with demands on indigenous ways of thought and indigenous knowledges. We've also had something called traditional knowledge licenses, which is basically inspired by Creative Commons. And it is envisioned as a new and complementary set of licenses that address the diversity of indigenous needs in relation to intellectual property. Now, these are things that have been happening, but as you would realize from my examples, much of this has been happening outside India. When it comes to the context of Indian situation and our relationships with respect to India, it becomes a little more complicated. One of the reasons that it becomes so complicated is because of infrastructural limitations in the Indian context, especially with respect to very remote areas where I work in Northeast India. And I wanted to give a glimpse of this, and this is where I think I will be able to go to my presentation in a while. Okay. Is my presentation visible?
Yes.
Yes, Doctor.
Thank you. So I work in the Northeast India, and I'm moving over from the map over here, Assam, and I work in this very small area which is known as Karbi Anglong, which is in the northeast. And as you can realize, you have Meghalaya and the Nagaland, and it's been an area of conflict. It has been an area of different forms of difficulty at different points of time, and this is important as an area. What's also important with respect to Karbi Anglong is, if you look at it, and I think when the cursor is visible, you'll find that there is East Karbi Anglong and West Karbi Anglong. Till I think as late as 2008, one couldn't really travel by car to West Karbi Anglong. There was a limit to that traveling, and one had to go by foot at that point of time. That's Hamran in West Karbi Anglong. So one's been working with these areas, and this is of course Taralangso, and I'll come back to this, and I would like to talk about the difficulties of archiving these positions and how perhaps a COVID-19 situation has made it simpler in different ways, ironically, for indigenous communities to begin this source of archiving, which probably wasn't as much possible earlier. This is, of course, Taralangso in Diku in Karbi Anglong. This is Jamble Athong, which is the totem of Karbi Anglong. These are first visual images of Karbi Anglong, and I'm going to move fast over them because I would like to go back to what I was talking about. This is Taralangso, and Taralangso is where the Karbi Youth Festival is held every year. This year, of course, it wasn't held in February, and it's held in February for not this year, but next year it probably we suspect. It's held for a week, and this is a festival that is held without state aid. And this stadium that was built for indigenous knowledge traditions to be built was built by indigenous holders of knowledge, and it was completely built by funds facilitated by the Karbi community. There was no state help at this point of time. And I think that would help us understand how archiving can become difficult, how the retention of traditions within this context becomes so difficult. Um, this is the Karbi festival that you find over here. You have most villages, they come by foot on foot to these to Jifu in East Karbi Anglong, which is basically a town, a city, and these festivities go on where traditional forms of archiving, traditional forms are celebrated across 5 days. There are competitions in different forms. This is, of course, from the 35th Karbi Festival and different forms that are being done. I'm also going to show you this picture that you see is way back in 2008 when one went from the university on a project on indigenous studies and you could archive. The person over here you see is one of the principal archivists in Karbi Anglong, and I'll talk about him in a while. You can see me over here as well, who is this archivist who has gone to get these things recorded at this point of time. And I think me sitting on this blue chair, not sitting across anywhere else, gives you the sense of difference that comes in, and a difference that has, and the limitations one has as a researcher. I always try to show this picture to anybody to whom I'm introducing my work in Karbi Anglong, because it works as a humble reminder of my limitations as a researcher at that point of time. And I think that was working, working at an university, going for a research over there and being limited in these points of view. This is, of course, being archived at this point of time. It was very difficult recording at this point because there were external noises and other aspects, which was, I think, true for a lot of fieldwork that is being done. This is, of course, me with the singers over here, not at all interested. They don't seem very interested in me, which is how it should be, I assume. This is again another picture that I try to show, and I'll come back to why I'm showing these photographs at this point of time. There was this woman who was interested, who was curious to know what I was doing there, and she was explained by my friend that I'm here for this particular research, and she was very disgusted with me at that point. I mean, she didn't think there was any sense in what I was doing, and it's again a humble reminder. This is some of the work that we've been trying to do, which is, of course, Bongrok or filled with sacred wine. I'll come to this in a while, but I need to go back to my paper. When I wanted to talk about is, of course, how is memory retained? What is this memory? The basic premise of memory has been its relentless effort to resist often inaccurate and fascinated central narratives of control called history. Memory, as we know, acts as a safeguard against attempts to silence voices of transgression and dissidence, and in turn, memory is often implicated in that silencing. So what I'm trying to do is to situate this role of memory within local, national, and transnational contexts and temporalities, and focus on this turbulent and fragmented history of selfhood. Oral traditions, of course, have consisted a growing field of inquiry, and particularly in terms of education, innovation, and ecological sustainability. Epistemologically and ontologically, oral traditions offer possibilities of creating shared capacities that can challenge conventions of practice and counter market norms. For example, if you can think about the significant interdisciplinary work being done to textualize and preserve oral traditions by the Center for Karbi Studies and the Karbi Lamit Amai in Karbi Anglong, Assam. Karbis are one of the largest hill communities in Assam and have struggled over the years for the retention of their cultural identity and sovereignty. The Karbi Lamit Amai has focused more on literary sources and activities, whereas the Center for Karbi Studies, which was built as late as in 2015, you've had cultural activists such as Dharam Singh Teron, the man whom you saw, and Sikari Tiso, who have worked extensively for this preservation of this rich Karbi oral heritage, celebrating or lamenting life. They have contributed to the documentation and preservation of oral traditions, which in turn is embedded in the cumulative experiences and teachings of indigenous people. The focus always has been on the creation and development of indigenous value systems, through constant engagement with indigenous literature, art, and cultural practices as part of lived experiences. So, and what does this imply in terms of opportunities and challenges of long-term preservation and access of Karbi oral tradition? How does one explore issues of research integrity and curriculum plans? Because for the longest time, for people who wanted to work on Karbi traditions, wanted to be part of the Karbi traditional processes, they were uh, they were often discouraged at the university level. They were discouraged, and if they said that they wanted to work with certain ecological traditions, they were told to read Amitav Ghosh, which may have its values in different contexts, but did not really always have a link with Karbi traditions. And it made simpler for somebody to check a thesis on Amitav Ghosh and ecofeminism or eco traditions, than rather to go into and develop one's own archive of indigenous Karbi traditions. One of the most important things that have happened is, of course, marginality of indigenous languages, which has been a defining trope, and which will basically contest universalist assumptions of literary traditions and factors in the unique ethnic and cultural experiences, which demand critical evaluation. Um, in the context of, from the perspective of India's Northeast, the common man in the Northeast is painfully caught in the mayhem of violence produced by unending militancy, interethnic fights, and the oppressive measures of the state. Along with this, Karbi Anglongs in Assam have been part of such histories from such ethnic histories, and you had what's known as the State Reorganization Commission, which was formed in 1954. It did not recommend statehood for all the communities in Northeast India. Consequently, the Hill State movement started, intensified its demands, and by the time of the elections in 1957, all of the 6 autonomous district councils of Assam were under pressure to form independent hill states. However, ruling Karbi leaders were in opposition to the formation of hill states. In reaction, in 1959, the Karbi Students Association was formed, the KSA, the first of its kind, in fact. Meanwhile, the Difu Government Boys High School was established in 58, and the first and only government-run college. Difu Government College was founded in 64. So you had discussions on land rights, cultural activism centered around these urban locations in and around Difu in its Karbi Anglong, images that you saw of Difu right before. So the Assam Official Language Act of 1960 led to widespread agitation, and KSA became active participants of the newly formed All-Party Hills Leaders Conference. They propagated the cause of this conference and also advocated the use of the Roman script for Karbi language amidst the staunch opposition of ruling Karbi leaders who were part of the then Mikir Hill Autonomous District Council. By Article 244A in the Constitution of India, as per as the Assam Reorganization Act of 1969, Meghalaya was created in 70. Karbis were given the opportunity to join the state of Meghalaya or to have an autonomous state of their own or to continue to remain in Assam. And this led to the largest conflict in Karbi Anglong till date because ruling Karbi leaders refused to do away with Assam, and which was then seen as a betrayal for many Karbi people, especially the KSA. And of course, many people were arrested during that time in 1973 December. They were subjected to brutal assault by the state police, and many KSA leaders were arrested. As a result, what you had in 1974, the Karbi Youth Festival was first held in Karbi Club in Difu, and it coincided with New Year celebrations. It was a small affair lasting for just 3 days and drew only a limited attendance. But it created a huge impact among the youth and students. Since then, organizers have made KYF an annual event, and it's an apex cultural body called Karbi Cultural Society, KCS, was formed in 77, which directly started supervising the KYF. Under the guidance of KCS, and KYF began to be held also in rural areas in Karbi Anglong. And of course, it's reiterated that, and it became a festival that has survived and existed with myths, legends, songs, and dances, and everything else being archived during this process. It is only in 1994 that it started to hold this 5-day event at Taralangso, which is this venue that you saw, and it led to certain changes. Going back to the presentation once again, let me know when time is due. You can just let me know. I can wrap up.
Dattaray, you have about 3 minutes left.
Yeah, that should be fine. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. I think this is visible again. Yeah. So what I would end with is these instances of archiving that is being done from indigenous perspectives, from indigenous traditions, and it is a work in process that we are talking about. All right. So if you can see, this is bong rock filled with sacred wine. I mean, one can talk just about this particular slide for 2 hours, but relax, I won't do that. And then what you of course have is one of the reasons why we are talking about it is about what needs to be archived and what must not be archived. And also the point of the difficulty with archiving within indigenous communities is because one needs to, draw a line at some point, draw a line that you cannot really do this anymore. You can't do this. There is knowledge can be shared, but there are limitations to that knowledge being shared. I'll go quickly through this slide. This is, of course, arak, which is homemade rice brew that is being brought. And what you will also find is this misapprehension and the discomfort of the academia to acknowledge these knowledge systems. And it's not something that is there just, and that discomfort has been there for the longest, has been there everywhere at all points of time. You will, of course, have, these certain territories being made. These are images by Dharam Singh Tehran, as you can see from this, of course, Sekatam or sacred chants that are being made at the altars. This is Thekere performing sacred chants again. I'm going to skip through this. Bonglang Terang is one of the earliest births of this. This is, of course, the Karbi Lamed Amai, an image of this. This is the Center for Karbi Studies. This is 2015. You can imagine how difficult it has been for a community to begin the process of archiving eventually as early as 2015. I needed you to see these books which came out during this time, during this period. And
Dr. Dattaray, I would like to intervene. Your time is up.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I will. This is just particular image that I wanted to show. These are things that happened during COVID program, and that's all. Thank you very much. All right. It's okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Dattaray. That was absolutely engaging, and lots of questions, I believe, from everyone.
We'll be happy to respond.
Yeah. So what we'll do is, if it's okay with you, we'll take the questions at the end.
Absolutely, not a problem.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much, and that was absolutely brilliant. Next, we invite Dr. Parthasarathi, and his paper is titled "Digital Archives in Indian Literatures and Cultures: Challenges and Prospects." Dr. Bhomik is Associate Professor at the Department of Comparative Literature at Jadavpur University and Joint Director, School of Culture, Texts and Records, Jadavpur. Welcome, Dr. Bhomik. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to the organizing team of the Jamia Millia Islamia University, especially to Nishat for being so generous about the due date. I know she knows what I mean. And without much preliminaries, let me come to my topic. And I'm sure that the title of my topic seems a little bit intriguing, and it's so prosaic and would remind you your school days essays kind of thing. But I'm here not to give you the thrill of your school days essays, but the precise reason of my somewhat prosaic title kind of opportunities and challenges, etc., and etc., is because here I am not to make a critical exploration of the digital objects. I'm not here to make incisive investigation into the love-hate relationship between digital humanities and literatures. I am here to share my experiences of working in a number of digital archives, in making some digital archives, both in the British Library and in School of Cultural Text and Records. And I wish that I also share my excitement, my optimism, my frustration, my elation, and not to mention my anger in relation to digital archiving in India, particularly digital archiving for Indian literatures and cultures. But I'm sure that I would reserve some of my emotions here for the time being. So just to make a small introduction, the possible relationship between humanities and archive, which is a kind of historical relationship, and it dates back to the classical antiquity, both in Europe and in India. The preservation of manuscripts and books in religious institutions like churches and temples, or in ancient universities, continued to illumine the practice of humanities for ages. That I think you all know. And in Europe, the etymology of the word archive shows its close connection with institutions like government and state. But in India, manuscripts or puthis were preserved largely by families as their sacred inheritance from their ancestors. And their study often remained within the family. So we could say that there's a difference in Europe and in India so far as this relationship between archive and knowledge is concerned. So the tradition of preservation of knowledge in India, both in the forms of memory and scriptures, happen to be to some extent familial, communitarian, and local. Obviously, the interventions of colonial education and knowledge systems undeniably played their role in reshaping concepts of knowledge and its propagation and retention, which brought epistemology to larger arena of mass participation and exchanges. Though it should also be mentioned that placing knowledge in global network started even before the colonial period, in the pre-colonial time, especially with Buddhism. I'm not going into that. So my interest is around 1980s, when digital technology was introduced in India and internet was launched in 1995. That initiated readjustment of knowledge architectures to a great extent, as it happened in other cultural sites too. The ever-increasing interventions of digital technology and its popularity bred not only euphoria and excitements, but also brought anxiety for Indian archives to equip themselves to meet demands of a new generation of scholars, particularly of humanities, who wanted quick discovery and access to cultural resources in suitable formats. On the other hand, scholars of humanities need to understand rapidly changing contours of archives, particularly in digital era. Preparing Indian literary and cultural resources for digital curation engages challenges and continuing negotiations that the Indian archives must undergo. But at the same time, how far Indian archives are equipped to meet this challenge? And not only that, how far Indian archives could still survive in the present day could be a matter of concern for all of us who are making papers on digital archives, or analyzing digital objects preserved in digital archives. What is the condition of Indian archives here? So Indian archives, I mean, it's not the question, question of critical intervention, but it's a it's a question of more mere survival, the mundane challenges of acquiring funding. So a centralized archive, for example, is an expensive affair, and unless the archive itself raises sufficient money for and from its everyday operations, it has to depend on government grants for its survival. And I know, being associated with an archive, a small archive of Jadavpur University, I know that how important it is to manage some grants from somewhere. but surviving only on government grants is not an easy option for Indian archives, as evident from a table that I'd like to show. Is it visible?
Yes, Dr. Bhumi.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm just giving you a statistics here, a statistics where it's very clear that number of libraries and archives in rural areas is 70,817, and number of libraries or archives in urban areas 4,583. So altogether we have 75,400 archives presently in India, and the source is a census report of 2011. And what's about funding, money? So money allocated, I'm taking this figure from the Union Budget 2020. So money allocated for public libraries and archives for 2020 to 21 is 103.51 crore. And average money spent for each library or archive per month is rupees 1,144. That is 15.53 US dollar. I think it's just equal. It's just the money you can buy 2 plates of biryani, and you have to maintain everything for your archive for the entire month. So this is the real picture that we have, and I just can't resist my temptation to compare it with the British Library, where I also worked. It's very ambitious comparison, but I just can't resist myself from it. That in the British Library, the annual budget is 98 million pounds, that is 724 crore, and which is approximately 7 times of the total budgetary allotment for all the libraries and archives in India. So a single archive having 7 times budget compared to our archives. And the UK government, they provide 73% of it in the form of grant in aid from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. And most importantly, an independent survey showed that for every £1 subsidy, the British Library generates £4 for its economy. That's interesting. That is not happening for us since we believe that archives are not for money making. And so apart from that, apart from funding, we have lots of problems in terms of space and other things. But what is the solution? And many of us believe that probably internet would be a great leveler. Internet would come out with lots of solutions for the ailing Indian archives, and digital archives would solve the problems of space, would solve the problems of funding to a great extent. But how far it is true? Since the challenging epistemological practices gradually leaning more and more towards digital technologies and exponential growth of both digitized and born digital materials, it appears that digital archive is going to be an answer to the plethora of problems that Indian archives encounter for their survival. But how far digital archive should come as a much needed panacea for aiding Indian archives is still remains a question. There is a general euphoria in our country that Indian archives that India is moving fast towards a digital future and undeniable increase in internet users, etc., etc. You can have lots of reports on that. That in 2019 we have 636.73 million internet users in 2019, and etc. But there's a great divide in internet use between between the city and the villages. I'm not going into that. But how far this proliferation of internet usage could affect the use of archive and digital archive, especially, hasn't been solved much. But obviously there has been a survey in the UK regarding this online usage of archive, etc., and the people's participation. I'd just like to show you, since there's no survey available in our country, you can have some idea of this survey. from which was conducted in the UK. This is here it is. It shows that percentage of adults surveyed who had visited an archive or record office in the last 12 months in the UK, and it shows a gradual, decline in the visit, in the number of visit or the number of footfalls in physical archive. And whereas in comparison, it shows that a gradual increase of visits in online archives, and from 2005 to 2014. So there's a gradual increase. Only in 2012, it shot higher than the data of other years. And the reason behind this increase in 2012-13 was the Summer Olympics that held in the UK. And it shows that how far the digital archive could penetrate the commoners' life, and commoners could go to digital archives for just to have information about athletes, or about Olympics, about other countries. And that is exactly what is not happening in our country. But we have some opportunities, because here is statistics of the price for internet price rankings, and thankfully we are at the bottom of this chart. That in India we can have a cheaper internet compared to other developed countries. So this is the scenario in our country, and probably from here I'd like to say that how far this opportunities that we have through internet would be actualized in Indian archives, and how far we can have more digital archives. Here, Debashree just introduced us to some of the archives happening in in remote places, particularly with subaltern cultures. But there are certain kinds of reservations still prevailing in our country about archiving of subaltern spaces. I'm just quoting from Radhika Gajjala in his essay, Caring Archives of Subalternity, Debates in the Digital Humanities, where she says, I'm quoting, the project of producing, maintaining, and curating, even sometimes gatekeeping archives of digital subalternity poses many issues. The text or image work and code work we do in the digital humanities are very important indeed, but these efforts must be supplemented and enhanced with dialogic, collaborative, and ethnographic immersion. Such immersion would entail actual travel to subaltern spaces for extended periods of time. And in building archives of subalternity, we need the strong presence of counter texts and counter arguments to prevent those archives from being engulfed by the market logic that aspires to mobilize the bottom of the pyramid as consumers. So there are certain kinds of difficulties in our country even to build archives of less fancied cultural resources. The question is then, what are the
5 minutes left.
So what are the materials that we should archive? I just gave you an example of endangered archive programs that we participated in the British Library, and there we actually archived number of endangered books, the market books, bazaar books were basically ephemera. But the problem is that when we archived them and it was supposed to be shared online freely all over the world, we found that the British Library didn't share it. I'm just giving the picture of that page and they couldn't share it because of certain copyright issues, because that was the tradition of Bangla books, particularly those endangered books which do not have much information about the author or the publisher, and that actually, hindered our effort to make those books accessible to all. And in fact, we find that all these copyright laws, the laws concerning the intellectual property, are acting against the small archives in the country, in our country, in fact, and facilitating the archives of the more developed countries. And that's a truth that we need to encounter. And secondly, another difficulty is, of course, when we're talking about Bangla, we have been engaged with lots of Bengali projects. But whereas the digital presence of Bengali in internet is almost minimum, is almost invisible. It's almost like 0.19% websites use Bangla language, whereas the Russian comes at the second spot. Obviously, with 60 point something percentage, English tops the list of their digital presence. Russian comes at the second with say 8 point something percentage. But Russian language is less spoken compared to Bengali language. Bengali language is the 5th largest language in the world, but it is almost invisible, and this is because probably we couldn't develop any digital tool for its visualization. That is something we are trying in our cultural text and record school, and we have developed few tools for collation softwares. We have developed some OCR, which is 98% accurate, and we have come with this variorum on Tagore, and it happens to be the single largest variorum available in the world. It's much bigger than Shakespearean variorum or something like that. And for that, we have developed lots of tools. So my point is that unless we have collaborations among Indian archives or the departments who are engaged in digital humanities or are preserving cultural materials digitally. So we need close collaboration. We need exchanges of our technologies and findings. Otherwise, we would spend our limited resources for that. I mean, much of our limited resources we spend for something which could have been achieved, in unison. So if we work in splendid isolation, I think there is no hope for digital archives in India. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bhomik, for a wonderful presentation and also for maintaining time. I just want to mention before moving on, to add to Dr. Bhomik's point about this techno-positivism that's in the Indian landscape about digitality. There are about 637 million people who have access to the web, but 9 out of 10 out of them use it on their smartphones, which means the digital affordances that we have create certain basic barriers to the act of archiving, accessing archives. And secondly, this idea of archives, it's as important as Dr. Bhomik mentioned, the idea of Bengali books online. There's the Heidelberg project in collaboration with CSSSC. And it's very important because when British Library came down to Indore about a year ago, we had a similar discussion about what kinds of books that have been made available based in India, like early Indian printed books or early Bengali books online. How are they made available to our students? And there's huge barriers and gaps to that. So it's very important to talk about what is being archived. An equally important question is who gets to make that choice about archiving? Which institutions have that epistemic authority to make that choice about archiving? Who has those choices? So we're going to move on to a third speaker, and I'm going to come back to this question. There are some fantastic questions in the chat box. I want to thank everyone who's putting their questions, and I would also like to ask everyone to keep putting your questions in the chat box. Our last speaker on this keynote panel is Dr. Reema Chaudhary. Her paper is titled Modeling Qualitative Analysis for Visual Art Forms and Epistemological Approach. Dr. Reema Chaudhary, Assistant Professor at Narsi Monji Institute of Management and Science at Indore. Welcome, Dr. Chaudhary. The floor is yours.
Dr. Rima, please unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry about it. Thank you so much, Dr. Roy, for your kind introduction, and to all the listeners who have been patiently listening to all of us till now. Today, I would be like more of indulge myself into a kind of discussion about the epistemological approaches that can help to analyze the film. Sorry, I have like logged in myself from 2 devices because of some camera issues in one of it. So please excuse me for this one. So I hope this is okay. It's working all right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So before I start my discussion, actually, I just wanted to tell you something about like how I have indulged into film analysis and its digital humanities analysis. The reason I have been grappling with the issue since my doctoral research was I was trying to actually lay down a rubric between digital humanities, digital humanities, films, and literature. And that is one of the reasons that has led me to keep on looking and finding myself new approaches towards working for films and finding some of the approaches which can help films to get digitally analyzed. So one of it which I've already worked, and before I just wanted to share my slides with you. Okay, so please give me a moment. Yes, I hope my slides are visible.
Yes, Dr. Rima.
Okay, thank you, sir. So it is more of a discussion on some of the key modeling tools which I've always been looking for, and they have been available for film analysis. It is more of a kind of inquiry towards the DH approach to the analysis of film language that will allow researchers to move between different scales of analysis, enabling us, for example, to understand how a particular aspect of film language functions in the work of a single director in a single genre, or across film language, or across films from a particular time period or geographical region. The study is a work in process, but it also inquires about why cinema scholars might seek to incorporate DH methodologies into their work. These are some of the probable questions which I feel can be some of the inquisitiveness towards and will help us to know why cinema scholars need DH methodologies for their work. So this inquiry has also come forth with Lev Manowitz's statement, I quote, "A completely automated analysis of social and cultural data would today ultimately deliver no meaningful results because the ability of computers to understand the content of text, images, videos, and other media is still limited." Unquote. As the process of interpreting a work of art nonetheless remains the prerogative of human brain, as do the questions that emerge as a result of data material. In general, as far as the chances and boundaries of completely automated analysis go, I would certainly agree with Menovich. To some extent, I think I have been able to draw the answers to this inquiry during my doctoral work. Some of it I'm still trying to find. However, a related answer to this inquiry of why cinema scholars might seek to incorporate DH methodologies into their work can be found into IMDb statistic page, which at the time of this writing include over 500,000 titles in its database. The IMDb search has been my first and the only database which was available to me in 2016 to find the Hindi biopic release from 1990 to 2016. Another possible reason or answer I see is that a film being an essentially a multimedia collaborative artwork that encompasses image, audio, text, as well as range of other documents, mostly ephemeral in nature, are linked to its production, promotion, and presentation. So therefore, over here, the scholars therefore struggle with an abundance of sources, particularly if they are seriously interested in engaging with film in a more comprehensive and data-driven way. At the same time, access to primary sources in many cases still lacking, and the databases currently employed by film archives and other collecting institutions, as well as online sources, tend to differ at substantially in terms of metadata quality and the available search functions. So although uh, although these limitations still hold today, but internal archive document for individual film prints are more significant and precise, especially for that were created as part of restoration. So unfortunately, there has been scarcely been they have been scarcely been made public or accessible for research. In order to view images computationally, a representation of elements contained within a visual material does need a metadata schema or algorithm capable of automatically converting the raw images into the established representation. So therefore, the active process of analyzing the large collection of visual material computationally uh, is that what we try and understand as distant viewing, and which is being required. And that is one thing I'm trying to foreground my inquiries about how these metadatas can be fruitful in providing the annotation and the other film language analysis needed in the current context. So one must therefore, although these limitations still hold today, the knowledge of the condition of what has come down was generally more fragmentary. So one must therefore make allowances, for example, for the shortlist or list of entities that were prepared in 1916 with the inception of DH, inception of film studies. So nowadays, films are like still annotated for more diverse question, I would say. By annotation, I here refer in general the sense to note an explanation or addition to an already existing text, rather regardless of medial form it takes, thus making a strong contest for the need or to incorporate DH for film language analysis. So while discussing the contestation of DH for films, it again further led down to doubts as to why it has now become important for us to investigate and find ways to annotate, and which tools can help us to establish a corpus of metadata. So to answer these doubts of my own, I just tried looking at why it is important to annotate and find some of the ways which can be fruitful in answering and can provide an annotation to establish a corpus of metadata. So one normally they could be like, these are some of my own questions, and which I have found as a secondary data from different references which I have been using. Where and how often was a particular film screened? The research question can be less focused on history of film per se, but rather on audience. How did the audience react? Do we know anything about social composition of the viewers? How was the film received? So these were some of the questions which again raised my anxiety, you can say, or curiosity towards working to find some of the possible ways which can help develop and find some of the sources which are available to analyze film. So finally, as a researcher, as I started my research, being part of English literature scholar, but always keen to make an interdisciplinary step towards finding some of the possible ways to analyze films and how DH can be incorporated into it. I'm still more interested in visual motives or image compositions. It would be image composition that would be helpful for me to find out how one film influenced other, or how the same motive alter over time, and how and why certain scenes and images are reused in later film. So reuse and intertextuality are the two keywords which I have been using and try to delineate some of the qualitative inferences for my work, while pointing out the images which develop lives of their own and change their meaning in different contexts. The earlier approach in my project in my thesis, which I used, was this atlas.ti. So I just wanted to share atlas.ti. When I came across this software or this tool, it was not introduced to our DH department. It was actually being introduced and it was being purchased for sociology department. I happened to be there in the seminar, and I was wondering if I can use this software for presenting or providing some network visualization or a content analysis wherein I can show the representation of my films in a graphical way. So actually it did work wonderful in terms of providing me the graphical representation which I was looking for. The only limitation which I was facing was that I have to manually set the pointers for all the data sets which I was collecting, and then put it accordingly the way I wanted. The another limitation atlas.ti is it does not provide you the time-based production, or it does not help you to provide a time-based production or the start and stop of a clip, so to say. So my recent work inquiring new modeling tools for visual art forms. When I'm talking about visual art form, I'm specifically talking about films. I recently come across University of Bowdoin DH software called as KinoLab, which I'll be discussing and a little later in my slides. So this is this is a tool which I recently came across, and Pandora I'm using this KinoLab and Pandora, and I have been in touch with Professor Alison Cooper, who is the director of KinoLab, who has introduced KinoLab in Bowdoin University. And I'm trying to trace the historiography of thugs and thuggy in India and its visual representation, which is again an expansion of my doctoral thesis. So going back to the first inquiry which I started with, and the tools which I was talking about, I will now focus on depicting the information one has gathered in this process. One can gather in this process. Generally, an understanding of notion of visualization in this context could range from the film itself as form of visualization to many ways one can visualize a film or part of it, through to using visualization as an explorative tool on both macro and micro level. I'm calling it macro I'm calling it macro in terms of close reading of the film's text, and micro level when we are trying to read the metadata sets of it to prove certain hypotheses. Finally, to provide aid to viewing. So basically, I'll tackle all these points, but will focus primarily on the use of visualization as an explorative tool.
Dr. Rima, 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Oh my.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just quickly run through some of the data models available for film language analysis. The first and the very first, first text-oriented, which also has brought the interest in moving image, is the Lev Manovich's Cultural Analytic Lab, which Lev Manovich and his team actually created a visualization of all the covers of Time magazine issued in 1923 to 2009. Now, this picture actually gives you a sense, if you just go through this, go and visit the website, as in how you keep on clicking on the different images there, you will find all the cover pages of the Time magazine being issued in this particular duration. A similar kind of approach I'm trying to build for my own research, that is while building the historiography of thugs and thuggery in India. This is one of the tool which is quite helpful, and it has its own limitation. I'm not going in deep as I'm quite limited with the time. So the next one is Cinemetrics. It's again well-established a collaborative online project for quantitative film analysis. Okay, and it has been founded by Yuri Sivan, which consisted to a large degree of manually produced data on an average short length of film. So as you can see in the slide, there has been, you can actually record the number of short lengths and the long lengths and the average length, and then you can find quantitatively some of these tools, because I'm not too good at this qualitative analysis. So I have not tried using Cinemetrics much. So next in a row is our this thing, Columbia Film Language Glossary. This is actually a teaching tool designed to offer users illustrated explanations of key film terms and concepts. It offers a relatively limited number of clips, with each clip selected to illustrate a single term or concept. This model, while self-suited to, I would say, like projects pedagogical purposes, it actually helps to differentiate initiation of film languages. So I have also provided the links to these software. Next is Critical Commons. This actually offers abundant source of user-generated narrative media clips, and it is quite similar to KinoLab, but the only thing is the semantic representation of Critical Commons is not apt as in comparison to KinoLab. So that is one of my choice which I've made to take my research forward, is like KinoLab, and they're still in progress to develop this thing. If time permits, there's a small YouTube clip. Shall I play this?
I think we just have about 2 minutes left, Dr. Rima.
Yes. Okay, so I'll skip this over here. This is actually, this video clips gives you the content of different advertisement, and it is quite useful. I've started using for management faculty specifically. I would say it is one of the tools which we can use, because it gives a set of metadata that help us to know this particular set of clip can be useful in analyzing what kind of studies in management.
You could place it in the chat box later so that everyone can use it.
I'll do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Again, in the row is like Pandora. Pandora is a non-academic platform, and this is a platform which I would say, if I'm talking about non-Anglo approach, that is, if I specifically talk about Indian cinema, Indian Cine.ma is the project which actually is being developed by using Pandora. So, and Padma is also being developed using this particular tool. I'm not going in much detail about Elan. So Elan is a freely available software and in vivo. These can be used for textual analysis as well as a moving image analysis. It gives a very easy and handy access of recording video clips and transcribe into the length we needed. Another is...
Ma'am, I would
yes,
like to intervene. Time is up.
Yeah, I'll just conclude in a moment. So MEP, Media Ecological Project, we can please certainly have a look at it. And this is again like we have distant viewing lab also. Again, the link is being provided over here, and it is also this is a graph which actually help us to see I Dream of Ginny and Bewitched over there, and they have been graphically characterized on this platform, wherein a character is missing for 2 minutes, and roughly the length of this entire recording is like 25 minutes, and it gives you a graphical analysis of the characters and the time they have been there. So Omeka, I've already talked about.
Ma'am,
yes,
we are really jam-packed.
So I'll just conclude saying that to grapple with the challenges of understanding the developments consequences for film historiography, my own research has actually focused to a great extent on the socio-technical operations that underlie digital methods to elucidate how quantitative and qualitative techniques can provide or produce the evidence for film historians and reconfigure their traditions. To this end, my research include theoretical perspective about literature, film, and media to study how concepts and techniques, both the digital and analog, amalgamate in the digital era to create new representational practices and scholarly research. In this regard, I consider digital film analysis as a product of both poetic and scientific gestures, as Michael D. Carte once labeled as scientific fiction. In doing so, I do not wish to reinstate a normative view of film history, nor of best practices. Rather, I hope to elucidate the epistemological underpinnings of analyzing film language and methods to invite scholars to use and critically discuss them and develop new quantitative as well as qualitative uses of data visualization to their own ends, while being aware of the inherent contingencies of digitized archival sources.
Thank you, Dr. Chaudhary. I think that was a lovely panel with Dr. Bhaumik, Dr. Dattaray, and Dr. Chaudhary presenting different aspects of archives, starting out from the ontological beginnings, the epistemic underpinnings, as well as the application per se. So there's a lot of wonderful questions in the chat box, and I would just like to start off by opening gambit through all three panelists. And I asked this because when Dr. Dattaray was presenting, I found a lot of parallels with my own project, because I worked on minority nuclear archives. So I worked with the Bishnois in Rajasthan, and I used to work with Native American reservations and talk about how minority archives against nuclearization work out. And one of the questions, and I think which also connects to Professor Zaidi's question later on. So if you look at the sort of etymological beginning of archive as archy, right, that idea that the archy is owned by the archon, who's the magisterial superior magistrate, there is an inherent element of power, and there is an obsession with the idea of a beginning, right? And this idea of the beginning is a Western Anglo-American obsession, right? And especially in a country like India with such vast archives, which Dr. Dattaray, Dr. Bhaumik have so brilliantly brought out. And in fact, one of the claims that I make with some of my colleagues in Dharti is that in India, DH is inherently rhizomatic. It doesn't have a primary taproot. It doesn't have a secondary. It's like ginger. It comes out at different places in different forms. There's lines of light. Do you think, and I use this to sort of go into Dr. Zaidi's question, like digital tools can really preserve and empower minority communities? And let me base that in an actual tool. For example, Mukurtu, right? Something like Mukurtu, when you take it up, which is an open source archive meant for indigenous communities, it's an open source CMS rather. If you go on to Mukurtu, you could see the visual rhetoric of 3 iMacs on screen, and 3 iMacs being talked of as the place to operationalize your CMS for indigenous communities, which requires a form of technological literacy, which I here want to come to Dr. Bhomik when he pointed out that this inherent techno-positivism. So do you think this act of archiving, we have to start off at a different departure point in the global south? To all panelists. Dr. Dattaray, we can start with you.
Right. Yeah, I think those are very valid points, and I saw Nishat's question in the chat box. One of the things that I probably try to remember is that indigenous traditions are living traditions. And I mean, I remember way back in 2010 when we were doing this conference on orality and performance, my colleague and I, and we were asked this question by Dr. Dev that, how are you looking at it? And one of the things that we came up with is that we're looking at these as living traditions which are ongoing traditions and not something that is part of museum history. And I think that is one of the beginnings that one does. The second thing that is probably very important is the idea of reclaiming from indigenous perspectives. And one of the reasons, I mean, my last slide, I know I did it a little hurriedly, and my apologies, I was so busy looking at my slides and the paper that I didn't see the chat warnings for the time. So apologies to Grace and you. So one of the things that I was wanting to talk about is how the COVID-19 situation has led to more forms of activism, more forms of indigenous scholars coming together with other indigenous scholars. I think that was another question that came up, and that's how the digital tools are helping. For example, we were able to collaborate with Maori scholars, we were able to collaborate with Karbi scholars. And when I use the word scholar, I'm using it in a traditional sense of the term as well, not in the sense of someone who has peer-reviewed publications. And I think that is a beginning that one must do. What's also important is, of course, that creates new forms of resilience within indigenous perspective. Within the COVID-19 situation, what has happened is indigenous communities coming together because funding is less of an issue right now, less of an issue in terms of collaborations and others, and where they've been talking to each other. So Karbi Anglong organized, the Center for Karbi Study organized this month-long orientation program on indigenous research methodologies, preservation, and documentation. I was part of that project, and I think that was phenomenal because we had scholars from the UK, we had scholars from New Zealand, we had scholars from India and others collaborating and talking about indigenous language and preservation. And I think now the ethnographer's identity, which I think is Nishat's question, and I think it also responds to part of what your concerns are, can be probably dealt with in a positive sense only if you have collaborations with other indigenous scholars, and if those indigenous scholars have a sense of community and responsibility towards the community, because an indigenous scholar may not necessarily have a sense of responsibility towards the community. And I think that becomes very important, and I think that relates to this artistic alliances that one is talking about. Alliances which are also related to podcasts that are coming up right now, and they're there. We need to listen. Emma Larocque told us, I think 2 decades ago, that we've been talking for a long time, it's time we listen. And also the tools that are being used are indigenous perspectives and other aspects. So not necessarily archives that are there, which is why I spoke about Red Man Laughing and the other one by Ryan, which is Think Indigenous. I think these are very important podcasts that are coming up. There's still much that needs to be done, but there are centers that are working on this, and centers which do not necessarily have government funding. So, and they've been doing a lot of work over there. And of course, quick response to Nishat's question, Karbi's communities, because I've had a long history with Assam, I've had a long history with Northeast, and I've been working with Northeast. I mean, much of my PhD was working with First Nations and North America, and now I work mostly on the Northeast, and that's a quick response. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dattaray. And before I move on to Dr. Bhomik, I just want to add on. Dr. Bhomik has a wonderful question from Sango Bidani in the chat box. But I would like to acknowledge what Dr. Dattaray said. I think of Audre Lorde, who said that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, right? So that famous point, right? So Dr. Bhomik, I think there's a wonderful question for you in the chat box, which talks about the idea of how preserving films is commendable, although it is true that preservation of films in other languages has been poor. Would you say that digital archiving of films would really be beneficial, given the problem of digital accessibility and also the lack of institutional support? And I think you mentioned this briefly towards the end of your presentation as well. And I know you've done a number of projects, for example, Soundscapes of Kolkata. I'm aware of it because of many of my colleagues. So if you would like to reflect on your own experiences to answer Sangovidani's question. Thank you.
In fact, I'd like to see all these issues from the perspective of an archivist rather than from the perspective of an intellectual or ethnographer. What I think is that we have already been discriminated on the digital platform. The international laws are against us. We don't have funding, and still, if we just go on debating on to do or not to do, and lots of questions asked about this, the digitization of subaltern cultures, etc. So we can have plenty of time to do that, but before that, we need to preserve them. That's the primary need. And I know that the films that I watched in my childhood days are no longer there. I know that lots of Bengali films are already lost. I know lots of Bengali books are lost. In fact, when I did my PhD on the Bengali literature and Burmese culture, and I had to go to London in order to find out Bengali books. The books are not with us. So what should we do? What would be our priority? Our priority is to preserve things. Then we can have lots of debates about that. So that can be resolved. But our first primary work is to save them from the ravages of time. And secondly, just as a response to the couple of questions that I was asked, yes, those films are to be preserved first of all. So don't bother about whether they could be put for online accesses. The first thing that we need to preserve them, and that's the most commendable job that we would be doing for our future generation. That they should exist. And secondly, yes, I was talking about the copyright laws, intellectual property laws. They are heavily against us because those the so-called rich archives could manage those laws. For example, when I was working in the British Library, I found that there's a completely separate section to make things copyright free, because when you're working in the digital archive, you are actually changing the format of any work that is from analog to digital. That you are actually violating lots of laws. So in order to clear all those issues, you need some professional agencies. That's exactly what the British Library did. And I know that some diary of some East India Company official, which was say 200 years old, in order to make it copyright free, they made a research on the descendants of that East India Company official. They found out their family tree, asked say 400 descendants to make it copyright free. So they could afford to spend lots of money for that, but which we cannot. So it means that we cannot put our materials, our resources online for mass access. So I think this is the point we should keep in the mind, that first of all, we need to preserve them. And there's another question whether we could, avoid those laws. No, we cannot. But we can, if we can plan the ways of its visualization. For example, presently we are working on the historical dictionary of Bangla, where if you put any Bengali word, then immediately all the occurrences of that Bengali word in all the literatures in Bangla could be shown. So in order to do so, we cannot put the books online, but we can show some relevant section that would not go against the law. So we have to be very clever in visualizing those things. So probably these are the poor man's ways to fight this discrimination.
Dr. Bhomik, I agree with you. Rima, I'll just come to you. And I think I completely agree with you on the act of archiving and preservation. And since all of us mostly here represent quite privileged institutions, I'm at an IIM, you're at a Jadavpur, And you said that you had to go to the British Library to find out those resources. So how can archiving be an uncritical act in the global south by saying that we just try to preserve the material? And this is a question as much as to you as to me as well, as a self-reflexive act. How do we keep in mind the reflexive position of the archivist here? And in this case, you and I would be privileged positions. How do we keep in mind those subaltern cultures, their concerns, while also trying to preserve as much as we can? If you could reflect on that for a moment.
No, I think once something comes to visualization, so that's a question of empowerment, whether this digital technology actually helping those who created that culture or living that culture or not. I think once they are on some digital platform, once there are some global network, there may be lots of problems associated with that. And there are question of ethics, question of all these questions associated with ethnography. But I was just wondering, what are the other ways if a particular culture goes on missing for the future generation? If some texts are vanished from our culture, so what are the ways left for us? Should we debate on that and then come to a resolution and then start working? So that's my point. I may sound very uncritical, but I think it's my urgency as an archivist that prevails.
Thank you, Dr. Chaudhary, please.
I just wanted to add what Professor Bhaumik has said, and I completely contemplate with the kinds of pains, I would say, which he has been facing during his research and while going to British Library, because I was also there British Library looking for the representation of thugs and thuggy in India. So therein I also face a similar kind of issues about the accessibility and the affordability of archiving these data. And that also takes me back to the morning session by Amardeep Singh, where he also talks about the gaps of archiving and the disparity. So again, I'll come back to Professor Bhaumik and would just simply add that yes, there should be a common platform wherein we can actually find some of the ways to initially see some of the ways wherein they can be preserved, and then these digital humanities tools, how they can actually enhance and add to what we basically need as the foregrounding of preserving these data. So that is one thing just I wanted to add.
Dr. Chaudhary, I have no disagreement with you. The only thing I was trying to point out, and that I think Dr. Bhaumik did address that archives are an act of epistemic authority, right? When we make an archive, that becomes a site for new knowledge production. And the way it's circulated, the way it's created is also an act of authority. So I was just trying to find out, we don't have answers. I think that's why we have this forum today. We don't have answers. There are major gaps and fissures. So what could be certain ways of making it a critical act while also being aware of the subjectivities that we are representing, right? So I think Dr. Dattaray was also talking about it, the act of representation. So Dr. Rima, you have a question in the chat box, which says that Dr. Rima working, this is from Sango Bidani, who says, working as I am on the cinematic adaptation of Devdas in Indian subcontinent, agree there is a problem of lack of primary sources. Having said that, I feel that while metadata could definitely be helpful, do you not think that one needs to focus on making accessibility of films made in regional languages very important? And I don't think we'll have time for any more questions. This probably would be the last question of this session. It's almost 5:26. Dr. Chaudhary, if you want to take that question.
If I'm correctly understanding the question, do you mean that accessibility of movies for using these movies for the DH platform? Does that what you mean to say?
Sango Bidani, if you could unmute yourself and if you'd like to clarify.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, please.
Yeah, the reason why I was asking that particular question is that I am working on particular case studies of each of these cinematic adaptations, right? And there are certain adaptations which have been completely inaccessible because even though the film archives have been doing some work on preserving many of these adaptations, the regional film adaptations are just not accessible, right? So don't you think we should focus on regional film adaptation preservation and archiving rather than focusing on what are the the traditional Bollywood films that are being preserved very properly.
Exactly, that goes back to what Professor Roy was trying to intrigue and ask Professor Bhaumek, that primary role and primary concern is to preserve the data which is not freely available. So that, yes, that is one thing which we all need to look about and have some foregrounding to bring those archival data first to its primary preservation. Okay, and then we can move about metadata and other realms in the go. So I think that answers your question.
No,
And
I think that's
this is
fair.
actually our concern. This has been my concern. That's why that it is one of the inquiry also. I just put it as an investigation, and while discussing few of the things initially, that why it is important and how it can be accessible and affordable, and what primary concerns are required in preserving those data.
So I think you're both talking to the same problem, which is that hegemonic archives of films in India are mostly Bollywood or Hindi film industry archives. And in a sense, Sango Vidani is talking about preserving regional film archives. And how do we do that in a far more democratic, in a far more accessible, and in fact, egalitarian process is, I think, the conversation. We don't have answers, I think we are all agreeing on that. But we all agree that the current framework is problematic. And Dr. Bhaumik's statistics slide, which was phenomenal, which talked of 15.53 USD per archive in India. I think that's sort of an eye opener. That was a brilliant slide. So thank you so much for bringing that to our notice, because that just tells you of how the lack of importance provided to archives in a country as rich as ours in terms of both indigenous and hegemonic archives, right? So I think I would like to thank all three panelists for doing fabulous presentations and opening out our conversations in very, very productive manners and in a form of productive contestation, I would say, right? So thank you, Professor Zaidi, and thank you, Grace, for inviting me to be part of this panel, and I pass it on to you.
Thank you, Dr. Divyadoti Roy. Thank you, all the panelists. So with this, we come to an end of the session. We break for tea, but I think we meet again at 6 p.m. IST for a keynote address. Thank you. Over to you, Zara.
Thank you so much, Grace and Divya. We had a great session, and thank you to our plenary speakers too. I'll be ending the meeting for 15 minutes, and then we'll restart at 5:45, and the session starts at 6 o'clock. See you all soon. Thank you so much.